Welcome to the second day of Nutrition and Health Conference. The first day of our conference was extremely well attended. Thousands of people watched our event live, and today we have even more exciting speakers to come. On the first day, we had scientists, experts on nutrition, and they shared the latest updates from scientific literature. Today, we will focus more on the communication aspects and how some people manipulate the facts on media and how that reflects on public health. So, from the media, we have Turkish and international panelists joining us. Before starting with the conference, let us see a snapshot of what we have done in the past years. To deliver the opening speech of this conference, I want to invite the CEO of Sabri Care Foundation, Begum Mutush. The floor is yours. Dear panelists, esteemed participants, welcome to the second day of the International Nutrition and Health Conference. It's a great joy to be with you. On the first day of our conference, we had local and international speakers to discuss nutrition during the pandemic. We discussed chronic diseases, hidden hunger, immune system, and food literacy. We discussed do's and don'ts, facts and myths. It was enlightening, eye-opening experience. I want to thank everyone who joined us yesterday. And today we're going to talk about scientific journalism. And during the pandemic, media literacy plays a crucial role in achieving a healthy lifestyle during pandemic, and we will have eminent speakers to discuss this. So, what are the facts during COVID-19? What are the challenges in scientific journalism? What is the information proliferation? What is the level of misinformation, and what can we do at schools? Today, we will be discussing those topics and many others, including the latest trends. Unfortunately, given the COVID-19 pandemic, we are going through unprecedented times. Food, nutrition, and healthy living requires much more to learn. And the biggest challenge is the oblivion of COVID-19, that this oblivion gives us or yields to a number of myths. So the mission of our foundation is like other health and nutrition safety issues. Our mission is to deliver the accurate information to the society. Our foundation has been active in conventional media, on our website, and on social media in order to enlighten the society with reliable scientific information. To summarize our activities, we focused on boosting immune system during the pandemic and what are the effects of popular diets on our health, and we organized healthy living webinars. The members of our scientific committee and the opinion leaders discussed uh, data that may change the dietary habits. And then we also collected international data and made them the backbone of our communication. And then we also conveyed the diet habits of during COVID-19. We were the Turkish partner, and then we had hundreds of participants on the survey. Then on October 20, we gave the Sabri Ülker Awards. Today, we are on the second day of the Nutrition and Science, Nutrition and Healthy Living Conference, and I believe this conference is another affirmation of our mission. Our foundation derives its strength from the legacy of Sabri Ülker. That is why our responsibility is at a premium, and therefore we will do our best for our society. We want to thank our participants and our panelists for joining us today. I cannot thank you enough. And I hope that after this pandemic, we will reunite in physical conferences. I look forward to it. Stay safe and healthy. And now from academia and media, we have two distinguished participants from Üsküdar University, Human and Social Sciences, the Faculty Dean, Professor Dr. Deniz Ülke Arıboğan, and the Chairman of Dünya newspaper, Hakan Güldağ. Please welcome. Yes, from Üsküdar University, we have the Dean of Human and Social Sciences Faculty, Professor Deniz Ülke Arıboğan, and from Dünya Newspaper, we have Chairman Hakan
Merhabalar.
Güldağ. Deniz, Hakan, the floor is yours. Hi everyone, hi, and thank you, Selen. Well, it's a great pleasure to join you this afternoon. We appreciate Sabri Ülker's Foundation's Nutrition and Health conference. I'm so happy to join an eminent scientist, beloved Professor Deniz Ülke Arıboğan is with me. We will talk about misinformation in communications and how it reflects on social health or public health. We have only 30 minutes,
Evet.
but then the topic is so large to fit into only 30 minutes. So, dear professor, allow me to convey my first question. Is it correct to assume that, I'm a journalist, I am very much into it, and I want to talk about this distinction between facts and myths. Science is the one and only tool to discover the facts behind things. Of course, journalism is also a pathway to find the facts, but science is unique in this end. But then the success of science and scientists also depends on communication, because the real achievement is to let people know about the newly discovered facts, isn't it? We are journalists to inform the people, and the scientists exploring for the people. I think we all depend on each other to collaborate. Let us start from there. How would you assess this fact and this the knowledge and the power paradigm, and how would you regard my statement on the real power of
Çok
knowledge
teşekkürler.
is to communicate
Çok
it?
da önemli bir yerden
Well, thank you
başladın
very
aslında
much,
Hakan'cığım.
and Hakan.
Burada temel
Thanks for
mesele
putting it that way.
bilgiyle, yani
It's
gündelik
all
yaşamımızda
about
yüz yüze olduğumuz
you know
bilgiyle bilimin ürettiği bilginin
information that
farklılığını
we
ön plana
receive
çıkartmak
on a
aslında.
daily basis
Üstelik o
and the
bilimin ürettiği
knowledge
bilginin içinde de
produced by
ayrışmalar oluyor.
science.
Yani pozitif
But then,
bilimlerle toplum bilimleri
there's
arasında
also
çok temel
distinction
bir
between
fark
the
var.
knowledge
Yani pozitif bilimlerde yasalara
produced by social
ulaşabiliyorsunuz. Yaptığınız
sciences
ampirik
and natural
gözlemlerle,
sciences.
deneylerle, laboratuvar deneyleriyle. Ama sosyal
In
bilimlerde
natural
bizim alanımıza
sciences, you can
geldiğiniz
achieve
zaman
a law.
her bir case'in kendi
But in
içinde
social
değerlendirilmesi gerekiyor
sciences,
ve
it's a
ancak
case by
genellemeler
case
yapabiliyorsunuz.
basis.
Yani yasa
We can have
oluşturamıyorsunuz. Yer
some
çekimi gibi bir şeyimiz yok yani. Her
exploration,
şey
but we cannot
değişebilir.
state
Zamana,
a
mekana bağlı
law, a
olarak bilimin
rule.
ürettiği
We
şeyler de
always say
değişiyor.
it depends
Üstelik biz
on
bilim
your
insanları yani
requirements.
fikrimizin değişmesini
And
bir
scientists,
ileri aşamaya geçmek olarak
for
algıladığımız
us,
için
updating
değişimden
our
rahatsız olan
knowledge
tipler değiliz.
is a
Yani
progress.
aslında
So we
her
are
bir
not,
yanlışlanan bilgi bizi
we
doğruya
won't
bir
feel
adım
disturbed about
yaklaştırmış demektir.
being
Yani onun
challenged
için
with
biz
new
memnun
data.
oluruz fikrimizin
So we are always
yanlışlanmasından,
happy
değiştirilmesinden,
that
bir adım
someone
sonraki aşamaya
questions
geçebilmekten
our
memnun da oluruz.
statements,
Şimdi
because that's the
tabii
only way to
kriz
progress
anlarında, işte
in
salgında,
science.
savaşta,
But
şunda
then,
bunda
in times of crisis, like in
ilk
a
kayıp
pandemic or
gerçeklerdir.
in
Bu hep
war,
söylenir zaten.
the
Savaşın
facts
nasıl
are
ilk
the
kurbanı
first things
gerçeklerse
to lost.
salgınların, büyük
The
krizlerin de
biggest
ilk
victim of
kurbanı
any
gerçekler olur.
war is the
Ve
facts.
özellikle yani burada
That also
üretilen
applies
bilginin de
to
öyle
a
çok
pandemic
bilimsel bilgi
situation.
olduğunu söylemek çok mümkün
So
olmuyor.
the
Yani
data
şu anda
you
içinde
see
yaşadığımız
in
salgın
media
ortamına bakın
is
mesela.
not necessarily
Bir
a
sürü insan
scientific
çalışıyor.
data.
Farklı düzlemlerde. Bir anda laboratuvarlarda
Take this
çalışanlar var.
pandemic for
Bir grup insan
example.
bunu politik aşamada
Millions of
kullanabilmek için,
people are
siyasi
involved.
kampanyalarında
Some people are in
kullanabilmek
the
için
labs,
çalışıyor.
but then some people
Ekonomistlerin
talk,
içerisinde
but they are
online
politicians
ticaretçiler
and they
buna
have
nasıl
political
reaksiyon veririz
gains.
diye
And
çalışıyor.
then there are
İşte online
online
eğitime
retail,
geçtik biz ne
and
yaparız
they
diye
want to gain
çalışıyoruz.
benefits. And
Diğer
then
okullar bu
there are
açığı nasıl
education
kapatırız
institutions,
diye
they want to
çalışıyor.
go
Yani
for
bu
online
çok
education.
farklı ve fazla
So
düzlemde
there are so
aynı anda
many different
yüzleştiğimiz bir
levels to
gerçeklik.
this
Ve yani
crisis
gerçeğin
that
tek bir
we have to
yüzü de yok.
face.
Yani bir doktor açısından, kalp kriziyle uğraşan bir doktor açısından, COVID'in etkisiyle enfeksiyon hastalıklarında çalışan bir hekimin yaklaşımı arasında bir fark var. Yani birisi virüsle uğraşıyor, öbürü onun yan etkilerini ortadan kaldırmaya çalışıyor falan. Yani biz böyle bir düzenin içindeyiz. Onun için hani bilimin ürettiği bilgi, bunun kamuoyuyla paylaşılması dendiği zaman, hele ki o kamusallaşma aşamasında işte bizim gibi sosyal bilimlerin her türlü yönü ortaya çıktığı için ideolojik yaklaşımlar var, siyasetten kullanılması gibi bir mesele var, araçsallaştırılıyor bu gibi tehlikeler, tehditler. Bu yüzden de bilgi şey gibi, hani Noam Organon'da Sir Francis Bacon'ın söylediği gibi insanoğlu kıvrımlı bir ayna gibidir der. Yani bütün her şey, bütün gerçeklik o aynada yansır ve aynanın ürettiği şekli alır. Yani aslında belki gerçeklik duygumuzun zaten gerçekle bir alakası yok da bir de bizim eleklerimizden geçmeye başladığı andan itibaren bambaşka bir yöne de dönüşmeye başlıyor. Onun için hani bugün yüzleştiğimiz bilgi maalesef bilimsel bilginin çok küçük bir bölümü. Yani kullanılıyor ve şekillendiriliyor.
But I like your mirror metaphor. We say be like a mirror, reflect the original.
Tabii.
But then every mirror has some impairment, right? Maybe in this digitalization, maybe we can cover millions of people and we can have a different level of understanding the facts, but for the time being, we have to get on with what we have. And then it's not just the scientists being happy with when they are challenged, but then if you are wrong, it's only a way of progress. Because if this is a quest to find something, there will always be a challenge on the path.
Önemli noktaya parmak basabilir miyim? Şimdi biz bilim insanı olarak kendi fikrimizin yanlışlanmasından memnun oluyoruz. Çünkü doğruya bizi bir adım daha yaklaştırmış olur. Ve biz yanlışlanmaktan rahatsız olmayız. Ama bu olayın bilim tarafı. Yani biz diyelim bir laboratuvarda çalışan insanlarız. Ama bilgi kamusal oluşmaya başladığı andan itibaren bize inanan, bize güvenen, bizim söylediklerimizle hareket eden o geniş kamuoyu açısından çok büyük bir güven kaybına yol açıyor. Yani biz bilgiyi buraya doğru taşıdığımızda biz bilim insanları olarak kendi aramızda konuşuyoruz, atıyoruz, tutuyoruz. Yani bir hipotez koyuyoruz ortaya, şu oluyor, bu oluyor ama önümüzdeki o profesör falan ünvanlarına baktığı zaman işte Ayşe teyze, Mehmet amca, şu bu, koskoca profesör söylüyor deyip ona göre pozisyon alıyor. Ben burada farklı bir fikir çıkınca ne güzel deyip bilimsel olarak ikinci makalemi tersinden bir şey yazabiliyorum. Ama Mehmet amcanın bilime, bilgiye olan, hatta otoriteye olan bütün güvenini yok ediyoruz ve bu tabii kriz dönemlerinde siyasi bir merkezden tek bir sesle çıkmadığı için, yani bir sürü her kanaldan artık şey de var, yönlendirme ve bilgi akışı da var. Büyük bir anksiyeteye yol açıyor. Belirsizlik, güven kaybı. Kime güvensin bu insanlar? Bilim adamları başka bir telden çalıyor. Siyasetçi başka bir telden çalıyor. Yani iktidarla muhalefet, ikisi de siyasetçi. İkisi de ülkesi için bir şey yapmaya çalışıyor. Trump bir şey söylüyor, Biden bir şey söylüyor. Yani normal şartlarda ikisinin aynı hedefe hedeflemesi lazım, değil mi? Halkın sağlığı, halkın güvenliği, şu bu. Ama ikisi bambaşka perspektiflerden bakıyorlar ve ülkeler yarılma süreçlerine giriyor. Bilim adamları da ya buna ya ona uyduğu için bilim adamlarının da güvenilirliği sınırlanıyor. Yani bugün artık Amerika'daki en önemli tıbbi FDA'nin başkanı bile politize olmakla, yalan söylemekle, şunla bununla suçlanır hale geliyor. Neye güvenecek insanlar? O zaman.
So if we cannot trust FDA, who can we trust? Well, this misinformation or proliferation of data, let us expand on it. As a scientist, what is the role of scientific news? But then, I think journalists, we are also responsible to this end. Sometimes we just write whatever, any statement is news for us. for us, we publish research results. Sometimes we may not be testing or contesting the data we received. I know there are peer-reviewed journals and there are more trustworthy sources of information, but we are talking about public data. When data becomes public, things get a little bit complicated. How can we solve this? Okay, we have this, Aunt Aisha or Uncle Ali or whatever persons, ordinary people on the street. They also make statements. And then there are scientists. They make their statements. Somebody says, this soup is good for COVID, a certain soup. But then you can see it as a news. Or that soup is good for back pain. So how can we restore an
buradaki
order?
Temel mesele şu. Mesela hakemli dergilerde yayınlıyoruz, bilim yayınlarını diyoruz, bilimsel yayınları. Orada bile birbirinden çok farklı sesler çıkabiliyor. Yani birbirini yanlışlayan şeyler çıkıyor. İşte yumurta sağlıksız diyordu. Bunun için hakemli dergilerden yayınlar yaptılar. Şimdi hepimize zorla yumurta yedirtiyorlar. Tereyağı sağlıksız diyorlardı. Şimdi hepimize bunu yaptırıyorlar. Yani eninde sonunda paça çorbasına dönüp gelebileceğimizden ben artık şüpheliyim yani. Burnuna tereyağı sür, paça çorbanı iç falan gibi bilgi bombardımanın altında kaldık. Şimdi bilgi kirliliği birkaç yönde gelişiyor. Bunlardan bir tanesi misinformation dediğimiz şey. Yani yanlış bilgi, hatalı bilgi. Bu herhangi bir şekilde bir yanlış bir araştırmanın sonucu olarak da çıkabilir. Genel olarak ortalıkta rumor olarak böyle işte rivayet olarak yayılan şeylerin dağılımı olarak da çıkabilir. Bu kendiliğinden gelişen bir süreç. Ama sonra misinformation yani dezenformasyona dönüyor. O da yanlış bilgi bilinçli olarak kullanılıyor ve yanıltıcı bilgiye dönüşmeye başlıyor. Yani bu dezenformasyona dönüştüğü andan itibaren konu geniş kitlenin yönetilmesi, geniş kitlenin sevk edilmesi aşamasına geliyor. Orada bilinçli bir biçimde istihbarat servisleri giriyor, devlette bağlı olarak çalışan bir takım şeyler giriyor, bilim insanları giriyor. Şimdi Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nde falan, hatta bu konuda kitaplar falan da yazılıyor. Diyor ki sosyal bilimcilerin tamamı Amerika'nın devlet departmanına çalışır. Hepsi askeri endüstriyel kompleksinin elemanı ya da işte liberal olarak görünenlerin de başka sektörlerle ilişkisi vardır falan deniyor. Şimdi bilim insanlarının da neye çalıştığı çok tartışmalı. Dezenformasyon süreci aslında çoğunlukla politik ya da ekonomik oluyor. Yani bir ilaç şirketi kendi ilacını promote etmek için aslında işe yarayabilen bir ilaç olmasına rağmen onun şeyinin yayınlanmasını baskılayabiliyor. Bakın şimdi bu hakemli dergilerde yayınlama süreçlerinde falan bu sadece komplo teorisi değil. Gerçekten üniversiteler, özellikle dünya bilimi biraz böyle kendi kilisesinin içine hapsolmuş ve sürekli kardinallerden izin alarak hareket edebilen papazlara dönüşmüş durumda. Yani o kardinaller kurulu okey vermeden bir fikir söylemeniz çok zor oluyor ve o birbirinin replikası ürünlere dönüşmeye de başlıyor. Hele ki böyle bir kriz ortamında komplo teorisiyle gerçek arasında büyük bir şey oluyor. Yani bir sisli bir şeyin içerisine giriyorsunuz. Büyük bir belirsizliğin içine giriyorsunuz. Bazen komplo teorisi gibi görünen şey, eğer ortada komplo varsa çok mantıklı da gelebiliyor bazı insanlara. Onun için de hakikaten Trump mesela çok ısrarlı bir biçimde aslında bu hastalığın bilinçli bir biçimde üretildiğini, aşısının bulunduğunu, tedavisinin var olduğunu ama sırf bunu başkanlıktan edebilmek için sağlık sisteminin o kapitalist devletlerin devreye girdiğini, Twitter, Facebook gibi sosyal medya devlerinin kendisiyle uğraştığını, o bilginin durdurulması için elinden geldiğini falan yaptığını söyledi. Şimdi Joe Biden rekor oy aldı Amerika'da ama Donald Trump da rekor oy aldı. Yani Amerika'da da milyonlarca insan Donald Trump'ın bu söylemlerini mantıklı buldu. Şimdi bir bakıyorsunuz hakikaten Twitter bir yalan deryası. Herkes bir şeyler uyduruyor ama Twitter sadece Donald Trump'ın yazdığı şeyleri bloklamaya ve bu yalan olabilir diye altına not koymaya başladı. Şimdi koskoca Twitter bir tane adamla ilgilenmeye başlarsa herkesin yalan söylediği bir ortamda O zaman sosyal
starts
medyanın
fighting
siyasete
against
ne
Donald
kadar
Trump.
müdahil olabildiğini ve
Anybody
hatta
can
Amerikan
tell a lie
başkanını
on
belki
Twitter,
Twitter'ın
but then you
CEO'sunun
can,
seçtirdiğini söyleyebilir hale geliyorsunuz.
and then people
Böyle bir
say,
durumun
well,
içinde
then the
de
CEO
komplo
of
teorisi
Twitter
yoktur falan demek çok kolay değil.
helps
Çünkü
America
siz işte
elect the
basından
next
geliyorsunuz.
president. So then you
Basın
don't
çok
need
renkli, çok
a
çeşitli. Ne
next
kadar
conspiracy
şey
theory.
tutulmaya çalışılsa da
You
işte
are
iyi kötü
from the
muhalefeti
press.
olan bir şey. Twitter'ın
I
muhalefeti
mean,
yok. Alternatifi yok.
although
Yani Twitter'ın
the
CEO'su bugün
governments
dünya
try to
sistemini
control the
kilitleyebiliyor
press,
enformasyonun dağılımı
Twitter has no
konusunda. Tek
alternative,
tip bir
and in
enformasyonun
terms
dağılımını
of
sağlayabilir ve bütün
distribution of
insanlar kendilerini
information,
çok özgür
Twitter can
hissettikleri bir
easily
ortamda
manipulate
inanılmaz bir
this
tutsaklığın
planet.
pençesine girebilirler.
And
Üstelik de
in a
özgür
platform where
zannettikleri için o
people feel
hapishaneden
or
kaçmak için bir
think that
teşebbüste
they
de
are totally
bulunmayabilirler.
free,
Yani
they
içinde
can be
yaşadığımız
in
bu gerçeklik üretilmiş bir
an
gerçekliğe
aquarium
dönüşüyor. Yani hiper bir gerçekliğin
of
içerisine
hyper
giriyorsunuz.
reality,
Orada
a
da neyin
poster
doğru, neyin yanlış
reality,
olduğunu
a
anlamanız
generated
pek mümkün
reality, and
olmuyor. Siz de
it
işte
is
gazetecisiniz,
so
bilim
impossible
gazetecisiniz, ekonomi
to tell
gazetecisiniz.
truth from
Hiç şey yapabiliyor
the
musunuz? Yani
lies.
rahat
I
edebiliyor
mean,
musunuz?
you
Hadi ben
are an
size sorayım buradan da
economic
gittiğimizde.
journalist.
Yani kaleminiz rahat yazıyor
Can
mu
you
bu
feel
konuları?
easy? Can you
Rakamları
easily
iktidardan,
write
siyasi
about
merkezden
numbers?
gelen şekilde
I mean,
mi kullanmak zorundasınız?
are you
Değiştirilebiliyor mu?
forced to use
Nerelerdesiniz yani?
numbers that dictated to you from the government, or can you write freely? Well, I am writing about economy, and it is easier to tell the truth in economy, and I believe we do it. It's all about observing the fundamental principles of journalism. You know, the journalists, our first responsibility is to tell the truth, the facts. I mean, there are laws, and people can sue you and take you to the court, but the laws also provide us protection. Sometimes it is exaggerated, and sometimes it becomes a legitimate excuse.
Evet,
well, they say,
var
I cannot
daha
write because
eleştirel bir tavır.
I'm
Yani
forced
orada
to not to
onu
write.
gözlüyoruz. Fakat buradaki
Well,
başka
okay,
bir
in
mesele.
economy,
O yazıları yazarken size
more
aktarılan bir
liberty.
bilgi demeti var.
But then
Bir takım
you
istatistikler
are
geçiyor elinize.
writing
Bunları test etmek
some
imkanınız var mı?
statistics, but do you have any chances to test the numbers you receive from the government? Well, for example, Turkish Institute of Statistics announced inflation. I mean, we can analyze all the details and we can confirm those numbers, because journalism is a profession of proving facts. As long as we can prove it, we have no problem to publish it. However, despite our proofs, if people don't believe in TÜİK's official inflation number or inflation in food, then, for example, sometimes we call, shops, and then I mean there are rumors that people call the shops and collect the numbers, and then I have heard that in inflation, for example, automobiles has certain weighting in inflation calculation. But that is formed by 20 models of cars only 20 models. But I heard that I was discussing this with a CFO of a car company, and he said we increased our prices because of the currency increase. And then we received a phone call, and the phone call said, can you reduce the price of this model? But then he says, well, I mean, I increase prices of all models. Well, can you just reduce the price of that model? I mean, we publish that too. I mean, we can talk about that. I mean, there may be a cost attached to it, but we can continue doing our job. But I need your help, especially about scientific journalism. I really need to know, what do you think? There is a dilemma. you know, I mean, I have no doubt that people benefit immensely from medicine, biology, psychiatry, and everything. And science keeps proving its strengths every next day. And we only know that it will continue. I mean, science can now reach borders, cure diseases, and helps us eliminate a lot of problems. But then we love listening to scientists. How can we filter all that information? How, so that, as journalists, how can how can we mislead people less? I mean, in principle, I agree with all, but then the reality is we want to communicate the scientists and their statements because people benefit from their statements. But what should be our filter in producing the news so that we do not mislead people?
Misinformasyon ve dezenformasyonun dışında bir de malenformasyon dediğimiz bir şey var, yani zehirli bilgi. Bu zehirli bilgi dediğim şey içinde işte nefret suçu, şusu busu da var ama aynı zamanda bilim insanlarının ve işte siyasetten uygun görülmeyenlerin toplumsal anlamda itibarsızlaştırılmasına yönelik bir trend var. Yani temel mesele bir bilgiyi yaymak ya da yayılmakta olan bir bilgiyi itibarsızlaştırmak haline gelir. Ve genellikle de siyaset kendi çıkarları için o bilgileri bilim adamlarının ortaya çıkarttığı bilgileri dünyanın her yerinde benzer şeyler var. Bunlara yönelik bir itibarsızlaştırma oyunuyla sistemi yönetiyor. Şimdi bakın mesela çok belirgin bir şeydir. Bu bilim insanları televizyona çıkmayı genellikle sevmezler ve medya maymunu falan derler. Yani medyada çok olan, sosyal ortamda çok olan. Değil mi? Hani bilim insanı medyayla birlikte davranıyorsa, ortama çıkıyorsa bu aslında bilimin aşağılanması olarak tanımlanır. Ve fakat biz bilgimizi kamuoyuyla paylaşmadıkça ve içimizde tuttukça da şöyle bir gerçeklik var. Bu Citation Index falan diye yayınlanan makalelerin ortalama okunma sayısı kaç biliyor musunuz? 7. Bütün dünyada çalışıyorsunuz, yazıyorsunuz, çiziyorsunuz ve bir makalenin ortalama okunurluğu 7. Şimdi ürettiğiniz bilginin toplumsallaşmaması, kamusallaşmaması halinde ne işe yaradığı çok farklı bir şey. Bilim insanı toplumla bağ kurmaya çalıştığı zaman eğer bu tavır olarak degrade ediliyorsa, itibarsız bir davranış olarak görülüyorsa, ondan sonra da itibarlı olarak görülen şeyin de kapsama alanı 7 kişiden ibaretse burada bilim tıkanıyor. Çok kıymetli bilim insanlarımız var. Maymunlaşma ya da itibarsızlaştırmayı göze alamadıkları için bilgilerini aktaramıyorlar, kendi içlerinde kapanıyorlar. Biz kendi içimizde akademisyenler tartışıyoruz. Bunu kamuoyuna aktarma dediğiniz zaman bir sürü filtreden geçiyor. İşte siyasal filtreden geçiyor, insanın kurumsal filtreden geçiyor. Birçok üniversite kurum kendi hocasının sistemin görünürlüğü içinde olmasını istemiyor, korkuyorlar. Yani yanlış bir şey söylediği zaman, yanlış dediğinizde ya muhalefetin ya iktidarın hoşuna gitmeyen bir şey söylediği anda linç ediliyor. Ya iktidar kurumu arıyor, ya öğrenci kitlesi ya da işte velisi memnun oluyor. Onun için üniversitelerin birçoğu içine kapanıyor. Dışarı çıkanlar da genellikle misyoner bilim adamları haline geliyor. Yani onlar belli bir siyasi pozisyonu olan insanlar oluyor. O onların işlevi. Aşağıda ya da yukarıda olarak tanımlamıyorum yapılan şeyi ama yani orada bir bilim insanı bilimin gereklerini yapmaya çalışırsa o sistemin dışında kalır zaten. Çok kolay bir şey değil. Onun için de kendi içine doğru kapanıyor bilim. Bilim kapandığı zaman bilimin ürettiği bilgi değil, başka kanallardan üreyen bilgi ya da misyoner bilim adamları tarafından üretilmiş bilgi yayılmaya başlıyor. Ve ortaya çıkan gerçeklik muazzam bir ayrışma hattına dönüşüyor. Bütün dünya ikiye ayrılmış durumda. Ve bu öyle bir hız kazandı ki bakın bilginin şu anda büyük bir güce dönüşmesinin en önemli sebebi ulaşma hızı. Yani dünya üzerinde bir telefonun 50 milyon kişiye ulaşma süresi 75 yıl. İşte ne bileyim radyo 38 yıl 50 milyon kişiye ulaşma süresi. Bugün yani Hindistan'da bir aplikasyon bizim HES kodu gibi bir
But then in
aplikasyon,
India, they
Setu diye bir
launched
aplikasyon
a
sadece
mobile app,
13 günde 50
Setu,
milyon
like a
kişiye
HAS code.
ulaşmış. Bizim HES
In
kodu daha
13
olsun, ben
days, they reached
geçen
50
de
million
bakmıştım.
people.
Sayın
In
Bakan
Turkey,
söylemiş, 25
the
milyona
HAS
Ağustos
code
ayında ulaşmış HES
application
kodu.
reached
Bunun
25
indirme
million
süresi ya. Yani
applications in
bir iki
August.
ay içerisinde 25 milyon,
So
50
in 2
milyon,
months,
100 milyon insana
we
ulaşıyorsunuz bir
can reach
aplikasyonla.
tens of millions of
İnanılmaz bir
people by
sürate
a
girmiş
mobile
durumda
app.
ve
It's such
o bilgi de
a huge
aslında
speed.
sadece sizin edindiğiniz bilgi değil, sizden de bilgi topluyor.
And it's
Olayın
not
öbür tarafı da
your
başka bir
data
şey. Bir veri
only,
dünyasında
and they
yaşıyoruz.
also
Yani
collect your
aslında
data.
eskiden insanoğlu dışarının bilgisini alırdı.
In the past,
Şimdi
people
bir
were
yerler insanoğlunun bilgisini
collecting
topluyor.
data
Ve
from
buradaki
outside, and
etkileşim
now
çok
from
değişik bir dünya
outsiders, the
yaratıyor.
others are
Yani ürettiği
collecting your
bilginin
data.
kime gideceğini tespit ediyor. Kimi nasıl
And
etkileyeceğini tespit
people,
ediyor.
and they can
Hangi bilginin kime
identify
gitmesi
the
gerektiğini tespit
data
ediyor.
goes
Onun
to
için
who, from
bilgi
who,
dünyası
and
Foucault'un
whom.
dediği gibi iktidarın en büyük
As
silahı.
Coco says,
Ve yani bu sadece siyasi
this
iktidar olarak
data
bakmayın buna.
network
Yani
is the
küresel
biggest
düzeyde
power
ekonomik iktidar,
of
siyasi
governments.
iktidar, sosyolojik iktidar,
I'm not
bütün
talking
bu
about
şeyde
politics. There
egemen
are
güç
social,
şu anda
economic
tankla,
powers,
topla, parayla falan
and the
uğraşmıyor.
ruling
Bilgiyle uğraşıyor.
powers do not
Ve bize
deal with
ürettiği dünya
tanks or
aslında gerçek
cannons. They
dünyadan
deal
farklı
with
olabiliyor. Bizim
knowledge,
jenerasyonumuz artık
information.
bir dünyada yaşamıyor.
Our
Biz bize
generation
taşınan,
do
bize
not
aktarılan
live
bir
in a
dünyayı
world.
yaşıyoruz.
We are
Dünyada yaşamakla
experiencing
dünyayı yaşamak farklı şeyler.
a
Onun için de hani bu
virtual
ortamın
reality.
içerisinde
Living
gerçeğe
in the
dokunmak ne
world is
kadar mümkün,
different than
ne kadar
living
gerçek
in a
kalabiliyorsunuz.
virtual
Gerçeğin
reality.
fiziksel
So
evreniyle
can we
ancak
really contact
uğraşan
fact?
bilim insanları ne kadar gerçeklikle bağ
and
halinde,
and how far
bunları çok
scientists
tartışmak
are
gerekiyor diye
connected with
düşünüyorum.
the
Çok da
reality,
kolay
and
değil
I
yani bu
think we
sisin
all
pusun
need to
içinden
discuss
çıkmak.
this. And it's not easy to get through this mysticism. Well, we all need to discuss this in different aspects, and we need a continuous dialogue so that when we look face to face, we remember what we have done before, and then we can go and progress for the better. We need more responsible and more, virtuous scientists and journalists, and corporations should also try being better corporations. We are all responsible. Well, tell me if I'm wrong, but I have this distinction: politics, and you have studied politics, and you mentioned some of your thoughts in and political agenda. It may be misleading to a certain extent, but in the end, you come up with a decision. Be it Trump, Biden, Erdogan, or Kılıçdaroğlu, you end up with a judgment. But then when it comes to health and nutrition, and sometimes there is no turning back. There is no turning back. You can be so misled that the news we make, for example, somebody has a stomach surgery and then they die, and the other person has this diet and had such side effects, be it death or certain damages. And I think that's even more important. And I think we're discussing this. What do you suggest? What do you suggest when it comes to nutrition? As journalists, you know, you know, we have to become independent of our audience and our subjects, but it's not easy to do because there are certain scientists they don't want to be media monkeys, and they
Evet.
don't go on to telly. But then the pool of mediatic scientists is so small. How can we enrich this? How can we build a larger communication platform? Journalism, social media, whatever media we are interacting with. How can we create a better pool and a better filter
Şimdi iki
curious on
tane
this.
çok önemli şeye değindiniz. Bir kere şunu söyleyeyim, her şey politikayla ilgilidir. Yani her şey politiktir. Beslenme de politiktir, sağlık da politikayla ilgilidir ve hatta 21. yüzyılın politikası çok yoğun olarak biyopolitiktir. Yani insan bedeni üzerindeki bir tahakkümden de söz etmeye başlayacağız önümüzdeki dönemlerde. Çünkü biz şu anda zihinler üzerindeki, işte Baudrillard'ın zihinlerimizin efendisi dediği bir şey. Zihin dünyamızın nasıl bir takım bilgi üreticileri tarafından şekillendirildiğini söylüyoruz. Şu anda bedenlerimiz de o bilgi üreticileri tarafından, bedenlerimizin efendisi tarafından şekillendiriliyor. Kolesterolümüz, kilomuzla boyumuzun ne kadar farkı olacak, burnumuz küçük mü olacak, büyük mü olacak, kaşımızın şekli, giydiğimiz, dokunduğumuz, bakın birbirimize dokunmayın diyor değil mi? Dokunmuyoruz birbirimize. Sevdiklerimize dokunmuyoruz. Çocuklarımıza, torunlarımıza. Büyük bir oksitosin eksikliği çıkıyor ortaya. Hormonal bir şey. Oksitosinin politik sonuçlarını biliyor musunuz? Oksitosin büyük bir güvensizlik bunalımına yol açıyor. Çünkü oksitosin güven üreten bir şey. Büyük bir güvensizlik çağına giriyorsunuz. Güvensiz kaldığınızda ne yapıyorsunuz? Size güven telkin eden ilk merkeze biat etmeye başlıyorsunuz. Yani bunlar her birinin sonuçları olan şeyler. Bakın Harari'nin söylediği çok önemli bir şey vardı son kitabında. Diyor ki tarihte hiç olmadığı kadar zenginler ve fakirler arasındaki uçurum bedensel anlamda açılacak. Neden? Beslenme nedeniyle, anti-aging nedeniyle, beden dediğimiz şey sadece bedensel kapasite olarak da gerekli. Yani kafamız içine çipi koyduğu zaman beyin kapasitemizi artıracak. Aynı anda 4-5 tane lisanı konuşabilecek, bilgiyi download edebilecek, ömrümüzü 150 yıla çıkartabilecek bir süreci hayata geçirebiliyoruz. Yani zenginlerin daha zor öldüğü, daha genç kaldığı, daha çok bildiği, daha çok eğitim aldığı, daha bedenlerinin her şeye dayanıklı olduğu bir dünya ve bir de normal insanların giderek daha zayıfladığı bir dünyayı söylüyor Harari. Yani beden farkı, biyopolitik uçurum önümüzdeki dönemin standartlarını belirleyen en önemli konulardan bir tanesi olacak. Şimdi bakın bu aşının kimlere ulaştırılacağı bile. Yani Covid kimleri öldürecek, kimleri öldürmeyecek. Amerika'da kimleri öldürdüğü ortaya çıktı. Yoksul sınıf perişan oldu. Hastaneye, sağlık ortamına gidemeyenler perişan oldular. En büyük kayıplar orada oldu. Neden bu taraflarda işte Türkiye'de, Rusya'da, Çin'de bunda bir şeyler olmadı? Çünkü ilk defa sağlıkta sosyalistleşmeyi bir anlamda sağlayan, yani devletleşmeyi sağlıkta sağlayan ülkeler nispeten daha hasarlı çıkıyor bu işte. Üstelik çok da gelişmiş olmadığı halde bazı Afrika ülkeleri şunlar bunlar. Liberal kapitalizmin ortaya çıkardığı sonuç bu. Ve Xi Jinping oradan şunu diyor. 21. yüzyılda 3 kriz gördünüz. Üçünü de liberal kapitalistler olarak siz kaybettiniz. 11 Eylül'de terörle mücadeleyi kaybettiniz, beceremediniz, bak ben becerdim. 2008-2009 ekonomik krizinde siz kaybettiniz, yine ben becerdim. Bu da küresel kriz, pandemi krizini yine siz beceremediniz, ben becerdim diyor. Yani önümüzdeki dönem uluslararası yapısal meseleler hakkında da bu salgın özellikle yeni bilgilerin, yeni doğruların, yeni değerlerin ortaya çıkaracağı bir süreç olacak diye düşünüyorum.
New realities.
Evet, evet.
So 21 lessons for the 21st century. Harari's book is really enlightening in that sense. So technology really changes our world, our way of living. And we no longer talk about, I mean, it's a kind of modern state capitalism, if you like. And all the economies are born from this Pacific region. And if you look at the liberal democracy, unfortunately, they have gone through some serious challenges and problems. Of course, we cannot talk about a winner at the moment, but we have proven that technology accelerates this kind of change. So from a geopolitical perspective, as you have just stated, along with these technological changes, we are going through a kind of a paradigm crisis. So paradigms are changing, and we talk about new hegemonies and new powers that be, the newly emerging powers. Both from an institutional level and from a state level, they seek new ways of dealing with these challenges. And states accuse one another of spying over one another. And really, if you own knowledge, if you have the information, that means you have the power to shape the world and this life and people around you, because it enables you to dominate people. So such powers will be even stronger in the coming days. So from the perspective of digitalization, actually, when we talk about digitalization, well, of course, investing in technology and digitalization, well, all these are very fine. But at least in the short term, this kind of innovation and digitalization bring along a new system in which the poor will be even poorer and less able to relate to this life on this planet. And we are talking about a serious divide between people and classes. Okan Tokomishkil, I remember one thing he said about this issue. He's one of most valuable scholars raised in Turkey, and he carries out research in these areas as well. So I would like to relate to that issue. Perhaps, I mean, if we are talking about generating new knowledge and bolstering science, perhaps things will be more understandable and in terms of public services. So Otamishkil says that, well, his question was, would you consider coming back to Turkey? And he said, of course I would consider it, but it's challenging at the moment. It's not easy for me. And when asked why, he said, well, there were a couple of issues and problems. First of all, you need to have the basic rights and freedom. You need to have an environment of freedom. And secondly, he said, there is this critical threshold, and the pool of researchers need to be so big that we need to be able to produce some things. So for the time being, in Turkey, we do not have that kind of critical threshold. And of course, the third factor he mentioned was money. So all these three need to be related to one another, and they need to be together. But what kind of steps can we take about this so that Turkey will have a brighter future? And if we continue talking about power, if all the authorities would be in your hands, if you had the chance to change things, what would you do? What kind of an outlook would you?
Bir kere elde çok fazla bir sihirli değnek yok ama her şeyden önce bir kere üniversitelerin işlevinin yeniden tanımlanmasından başlamak lazım. Tabii ki akademik özgürlükler, özellikle medya ile ilgili özgürlükler demokrasinin teminatı. Ama şunu da söyleyeyim, yani bu standart özgürlük söylemi de yeterli olmuyor. Dünyanın en özgür olmayan ülkesi Çin mesela. Çin'de pekala bilim gelişebiliyor. Ben burada şunu söylemek istiyorum. Temel mesele vizyondur. Yani öyle bilim adamları eskiden yakın zamana kadar, bundan 7-8 yıl öncesine kadar Çin'e üniversite okumaya giden gençlerin %90'ı Çin'e dönmezdi. Şu anda %90'dan fazlası Çin'e dönüyor. Yani Türkiye'de bir dönem büyümeye, kalkınma vizyonu ortaya koyduğu için dünyanın dört bir yanından akademisyenlerin, iyi yetişmiş insanların, değişik uluslararası bürokratların Türkiye'ye dönüşünü sağlamıştı. Türkiye bir ışık vermiyor. Yani hani hep derler ya, Buda'nın lafıdır, yani bir yerde ışık varsa orada gölgesi de vardır. Biz sürekli gölgedeyiz. Ya ışığı bir türlü göremiyoruz. Yani gölge var, ışık yok. Işığı sağlamak lazım. İnsanları ürküten bir baskı ortamı var, bir kötücüllük ortamı var. Bir kere bunun ortadan kaldırılması lazım. İkincisi, belli kaynakların belli üniversitelerde toplaşmasına ve bunlara değer verilmesine ön ayak olmak lazım. Şimdi her şehre üniversite açtığınız zaman o üniversite o şehrin kalkınması için turistik bir faaliyete dönüşüyor. Öğrenci geliyor, ev kiralıyor, orada yiyor, içiyor bilmem ne ama kaynağı dağıtıyorsunuz. Halbuki Gökhan Hoca'nın söylediği şey çok önemli. Belli merkezlerde toplanmış ve sinerji oluşması lazım. Yani üniversite dediğiniz işe biz lecture veriyoruz sürekli. Yani 3 tane hocayı bir araya getirdiğinizde bir bölüm açabiliyoruz. Yaptığımız şey bilimin önünü açacak bir şey değil ki, birbirini tekrarlayan, bolca derse bolmuş. Ekmek parası. Üniversite, bilim ekmek parası işi. Burada sıkıntı var. Artı şunu da söyleyeyim. Bilim artık üniversitenin dışında gelişiyor. Bakın kimse BioNTech'i falan sorgulamıyor. Yani Pfizer'e bakın, şuna bakın, buna bakın. Hepsi üniversite dışında. Teknoloji üniversite dışındaki firmalar geliştiriyor. Yani bilim üniversitenin tek elinden çıktı, dışarıya özel sektöre doğru aktarıldı. Onun için o bölüme araştırma yapabilmeleri için ekstra kaynak ayrılması gerektiğini de düşünüyorum. İşi sadece üniversitelere bırakmamak lazım. Artık Gökhan Otamışgil Hoca'yla sosyal medyadan yazıştık. Onu Türkiye'ye getirmenin bir yolu yok diye Türk yemeklerini özlemiş. Dedim ki hocam bekliyorum, ben ellerimle mantı açacağım. Size güzel Türk yemekleri yapacağım. Söz dedi, o zaman yazın geliyorum. Bakalım tavlayabilirsem tavlarım hocaya geri dönüşü için. Yöntem bu.
I promised him to offer him delicious Turkish food. Well, thank you very much. That was a very enjoyable talk indeed. I've learned a lot from this discussion. Thank you very much. Perhaps we could have a longer version of this kind of panel discussion later on. So that we will continue.
Çok teşekkürler. Yani Sabri Ülker Vakfı bizim için de çok özeldir. Eşim de uzun yıllar orada çalıştığı için ben kendimi bir aile parçası olarak, aile üyesi olarak da görüyorum doğrusu.
There for years, so it's kind of a family member for us. Well, thank you very much. With your permission, I would like to wish safety and health to our viewers, and then I will be handing over to Selen. Professor Deniz Ülke Arıboğan and Mr. Hakan Güldal, thank you very much for this enlightening panel discussion. Professor Arıboğan talked about pollution, information pollution in his talk, and he also questioned how people could trust and in whom they could trust. So as we seek answers to these kinds of questions, we will be listening to another speaker of ours from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Institution FAO member Arsel Gülışık will be with us. Selışık will be talking with Dilara Kuçak about the facts about nutrition during the pandemic. Ayşegül Hanım, Dilara Hanım, welcome both. we are together with you with a new panel during which we will be talking about nutrition and agriculture. So we will have Ayşegül Selişik of the FAO, Turkey Vice Representative from UN, and Dilara Koçak, nutrition expert. Well, thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and good evening. It's already dark in Istanbul. Ayşegül Hanım, welcome. Welcome, Dilara Hanım. Thank you. How are you? Well, where are you now? I am in Şanlıurfa, just after another meeting. I participated in yours, so I do apologize for the technical problem we have had, and I was a bit late. Well, it's okay now, no problem. FAO, Food and Agriculture Institution, is affiliated with the UN, and they are dealing with and focusing on hunger on a global basis. And of course, all these are interrelated with one another. And during the pandemic, we have seen that, I mean, at the level of saturation, if you look at food products and agricultural production, we have started to be interested in production and production processes. Very widely, it has become a burning agenda for us. And on the other hand, the world population is increasing. It's anticipated that the world population will be at around 10 billion. So if that happens, how will we be feeding the world, and will we be able to do that at all? Well, we can feed the world in all ways, actually. Once we will be able to deal with waste, and once we will be able to keep away from egoism and selfishness, because all people on the face of the earth actually are able to benefit from common resources. So if we will be able to build some common strategies to make it happen, it's a possibility. It's not a dream. So COVID-19, what did it teach us? Agriculture is important because we are in need of food, and we are in need of healthy food, actually. It's not only about getting energy, so that, I mean, we are not talking about having and consuming but some fundamental and basic foods. That does not matter. We have to have healthy foods. This is very critical. So agriculture has not stopped during COVID-19. The farmers have continued to produce for us. But do we have sufficient food in the world? Well, we have production, but we cannot talk about a just distribution of what is produced in the world. So every year we issue a report on these issues. For the time being, we have for about 610 million people who are fighting against famine. So these numbers are being updated all the time. But with the pandemic, an additional 130 million people had to face hunger. This is an anticipation, and it will happen in the short future. So if we talk about sustainability and realizing our targets, we are not talking about this zero hunger point, actually. So agricultural production, we have to increase efficiency, and we have to do that for natural resources, or we have to own our natural resources. We have to keep away from wasting our foods. And on the other hand, the world population will also increase, and we have to support this through investments, like investing in innovation and agricultural products. So all around the world, we have to centralize this issue. When we talk about agriculture, I keep thinking about soil, but actually, when we talk about agriculture, we talk about animal husbandry as well. we talk about nomadic shepherds and people dealing in the agricultural industry. So we have to own these people. So how does that work? So these small units, why are these traditional methods so valuable? Well, all around the world, actually, I mean, more than 80% of the farmers producing for us are small family institutions and facilities and farms. Well, if we are talking about small scale facilities, yes, they might be more efficient, they might be more productive. So on a large scale, you have a higher yield, and your mechanization and your infrastructure systems are more developed. So that means you can produce more. But that is not the reality, not in Turkey, neither in the world. So small family farms, if you look at these small scale family farms and think about their social and economic security, if you bolster them through that, if you support them in these areas, that means they will be able to produce more efficiently and in higher amounts. So that has other issues as well, where we keep talking about owning our cultural heritage, for example, and the same thing holds true for agricultural production processes as well. Perhaps we are talking about some seemingly basic things like preserving our seeds and trying to be efficient and organic in agricultural production. So we have to perpetuate that traditional production of agriculture. But if we do not protect family-sized farms, and if we leave them alone, what will happen? Well, they will just stop producing. They will leave their farms and fields. That has already happened, actually. And for those who live in the city, it's like everything has been planned for urban dwellers instead of farmers. So in such an environment, it's very natural that the farmers will just quit producing on their fields and move away from agriculture. So in the 2000s, we have taken the first step. So family farming is important, and protecting these small size family farmers is also important. And within this framework, protecting and supporting women and women entrepreneurs is highly critical, of course, because they do not have access to sufficient funds all the time. If that would be a reality, our agricultural production might increase by 30%, which has been proven by a recent survey. So all around the world, we are in need of models that would support family farming, and we have cooperations and other kinds of organizations established to this end only. So, I mean, you may talk about funding support, and that helps them to a certain extent, but from an urban perspective, I mean, if they want to reach out to big cities and to global markets, they are in need of more. So digital agriculture, online sales. So in this period, numerous new entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship models have emerged. As you know, we have this new platform for agricultural producers. Both producers and the consumers, the buyers of agricultural products, can come together. So gradually, these kinds of organizations and corporations reach out to farmers as well. So let's call it digital marketing. The farmers need to develop their brands so that they can reach out to big cities and to global markets. And they need to know a lot about climate, the atmosphere, and soil structure, and so on. So that kind of training and raising awareness, of course, come with high costs. So you need to have new models. So all these are new issues that we need to discuss around the table. I call it this new world order. I very much hope that things will get back to normal, but on the other hand, time passes rather quickly, and in order to be able to catch up with this swiftly passing time, we need to act quickly and spend these days efficiently. So the private sector holds another important place in these discussions. I mean, volunteerism and the role of volunteers and NGOs, they have a highly critical role. So we are an international organization, and we work with governments, but farmers, small scale farmers. We can reach out to them, and we can support them. So farmers and farming, this is important. So, with your permission, we have numerous participants in our group of weavers who are dietitians and nutritionists. So, you said we need to develop and improve agriculture. And in these days of COVID-19 and the challenging days of the pandemic, everyone is considering just buying a small rustic house and settle in the country. So this kind of opportunity needs to be owned for the benefit of the world and for the benefit of societies. In 1927, 76% of the global population lived in rural areas. In the 1970s, that was 50%. And in 2020, only 20% of people live in rustic areas in the country. So that everyone moves into cities. So, dear colleagues, if you have a family member, an elderly person in your community who are interested in and affiliated with agriculture and agricultural production, this is really an important issue. So, let's highlight that here as well. We also talked about sustainable development. Sustainable nutrition. Well, as a definition, we have a definition for sustainable nutrition. And this is such a definition that for many long years, as we have been offering our counseling services in the areas of nutrition and diet, we also focus on the cultural background of communities and people and how they've learned consuming food. So at the end of the day, the main message is that we should not be selfish. We should not be thinking about ourselves only, but we should consider the future generations as well. So I will be reading you this definition. Four tells us that sustainable nutrition is about nutrition, healthy, and low environmental impact. So this is what we need to have in our sustainable nutritional framework, if you like. It needs to be economical, affordable, and safe. It contributes to food safety, and at the same time, it offers a form of life for us and for the future generations. So, this is how I summarize this main message. The future lies in our traditions. So we need to own our traditions. We need to think about our own ecological system. I mean, isn't sustainable nutrition all about living and future? Well, I wholeheartedly agree with you, especially in your striking summary, which says the future lies in our traditions. So for many long years, this is actually the kind of message I have been giving to my colleagues and to people around me. Farming is not a hobby; it's a real profession, and farmers work very hard for us. And we have to consider them. We have to think about them. We have to contribute to them. So this definition, well, when it says environmental impact, we have to think about our impact, our footprint. So this is all about thinking and considering where is this food coming from? Who are the producers? Perhaps our farmers might have serious challenges when trying to access water, for example. So we may not be aware of it. And if they have that kind of difficulty in their production cycles, how can we have healthy foods? So we have three fundamental levels when we talk about healthy nutrition. So you need to have sufficient energy. So in the short run, this is okay. It will keep you alive. That is the kind of benefit we get from it. So healthy nutrition from a nutritional perspective, but that is not sufficient either. Healthy nutrition, so in numerous food groups, well, it includes all sorts of foods, and we are talking about food diversity, if you like. So, how can we reach and realize that kind of food diversity? Thankfully, we live in a wonderful country. We have a striking beauty when we talk about our geography, and all sorts of products can be raised in their respective seasons. So, you are a nutritionist and you would have better definitions than I do. But if we need to sustain our consumption of healthy foods, we need to turn our faces back to our traditions, to the foods and meals cooked by our mothers. So the pandemic has, in a way, helped us in that area because we are now spending more time in our kitchens, and we have started cooking ourselves instead of going out for eating. But we have to remember these new channels and new platforms because, again, during the pandemic, we have created channels through which we can just receive our food ready cooked and ready made. It is not sufficient to talk about raising awareness and training and being aware. We really need to take an active step, a proactive step, and start changing things. So, if we can talk about healthy nutrition, we will be able to talk about sustainable agriculture as well. Because when we talk about sustainable and healthy agriculture and nutrition, you need to be focusing on the human being. You need to be supporting farmers, the youth, and women, so that they will stay in their agricultural production cycles. Well, on one hand, I am part of this agricultural production world, but I'm also dealing with politics. Would I be able to produce myself? Well, no, because I need to have access to a patch of land so that I can produce. But there are people around us who do this already. So let them do it in a comfortable and efficient way so that they will feel safe and they will be able to have a high living standard so that they will be able to continue to grow for us. On the other hand, it's not only about vitamins and supplements that would not save us. So, in the existing framework, it would be sufficient for us if we would be able to access to these healthy foods produced in nature. This should be for everyone, and we need to have equality. Everyone should be able to access healthy food. So for this to happen, we need to support sustainable agriculture, animal husbandry. So, so we have to be proactive and contribute to whatever is being done for that. So partnerships for collaboration and solidarity. So you are the wise representative for Turkey. So in our culture, we tend to own things very strongly. I know that. So you have great stamina and a great will to do this. So we very much hope that we can support you. Well, healthy nutrition defines all. This was what you said. And one thing I would like to share with you to learn more about what you think about is that, well, we need to consume foods in respect to seasonality, and we need to keep away from excessive consumption. If you would be consuming spinach all the time, that would not be good for you. So 75% of the supply on a global scale, we usually consume wheat, corn, and rice. So this evolved into a monoculture agriculture. And that kind of monoculture consumption is bad for biodiversity. It makes me ill, it makes you ill. So, from that perspective, healthy nutrition, it's also bad for the soil and it causes waste. So, if you waste water for your agricultural production, or if you would be wasting uh, what you get from nature, that is harmful for uh, the nature. So nutrition and agriculture are together, and we start consuming our mother's milk, and then start consuming. Perhaps we need to discuss consumption separately. Waste of food. I mean, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry collaborated with us, and you have also contributed to our project. We are trying to raise awareness on a global scale. FAO has been working on this for a long time now. We talk about a just distribution and our fight against wasting our food. 1/3 of the food produced in the world is wasted. Well, let me not refer to these numbers, but why can't we be more conscious? Why do we consume more than we actually need? So we have individual differences, and we are all in need of a change in our modes of behavior, if you like. And the meeting I have been participating before this one was about forests, and we discussed endemic plants and forests and preserving them. So we have been working on an inventory project. So perhaps these kinds of records and inventory work should be done for all countries, because this is what we will be leaving behind for our children, for future generations, not only as records but in their reality. So when we talk about sustainable agriculture, we are talking about agricultural methods which are in line with climate change. We need to observe climatic changes, and we need to be aware of differences in different product groups. Of course, there are methods that would enable us to do it. You can just plant another um, product, or you can leave your field as a fallow field for one season or for a couple of seasons to increase efficiency. So we have numerous methods, but they need to be widespread. So, and more farmers need to be able to implement these kinds of methods. Well, we have exceeded our time tremendously. I do apologize. Our next speaker will be from Aras University, and he has to leave at 5 p.m. So we might have such problems in these digital meetings. So I do apologize. So it's 20 minutes. We have the last 2 minutes. Let's for a wrap up. So let's wrap up in the last 2 minutes. As part of sustainability, as I have said, agriculture and nutrition are together. So we need to work together. And we need to have a healthy balance between consumption and agricultural production. Well, thank you very much. Well, this was a very good message, actually. It was a short panel, but we got some very important messages. So, distinguished participants, we would like to thank you. Healthy nutrition is our main area of work. This is where we want to create optimum and positive results for sustainability and development purposes. We keep working. So thank you everyone for your participation. Enjoy your day. Thank you very much, Ms. Sereshik, Ms. Kochak. Thanks for this enlightening talk. Now we will be moving on to our next speaker from Aras University. He is a marketing professor and the founding member and director of MNB Research Institution. Professor Klaus Grunert, the floor is yours.
Now let me present Professor Klaus Grunert from Aarhus University. Klaus Grunert is a professor at Department of Management and director of the MAPP Center. Klaus has been a guest lecturer and a visiting professor at numerous institutions around the world and is a member of several editorial boards. He has been serving on many scientific advisory boards also. He has also been serving as a board member of several companies. Professor Klaus Grunert, please welcome.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to contribute to this conference here. I want to talk about health communication from a behavioral change perspective. My background is I do research on consumer behavior with regard to food and drink. And health communication these days is a really difficult topic because, as you all know, we are all the time confronted with lots and lots of information. more information than we possibly can attend to. And the way the human mind reacts to that is that we ignore most of the information that is around us. And that is also the case with regard to health communication. So if we want to communicate about health and food these days, we face special challenges. What I want to do in this presentation here, I would like to start by putting health communication into a behavioral change perspective. And then I will take you through some major steps, some major effects that health communication needs to have if we want that health communication actually has an effect on people's behavior. So that is the main outline that I have. And what do I mean when I say health communication from a behavioral change perspective? Because the reason why we engage in health communication can be two. First of all, we can say people have a right to know. People have a right to know about which food is good and which is not so good for them. They have a right to know about the nutritional content of food. They have a right to know about what is a healthy diet. And they have a right to know this even though they may not be interested or they may not be willing to use this information. And that is an absolutely valid argument, but it is not the point of departure I will have in this presentation here. In this presentation, I will assume that we engage in health communication because we want people to make more healthy and sustainable food choices, that it has an impact on their behavior. And if we do that, or once we do that, it also implies that we need to put health communication into the context of other instruments that we have for bringing about behavioral change. We have the strong instruments, regulation and taxation. We can prohibit certain food products to be marketed. We can tax unhealthy products. We can subsidize healthier products. And it will usually have an impact on people's behavior. But then we have also a group of instruments that has become more popular recently under the heading of nudging, which has to do with that sometimes we can affect people's behavior by small changes in the environment in which they make choices. The classical example is you have cake and fruit on the same table. If you move the fruit a bit closer to people and the cake a little bit further away, just half a meter or so, it will increase the likelihood that people choose the fruit and not the cake. That is interesting and has attracted a lot of attention because this is an attempt to change behavior that does not require people to learn a lot of information and engage in a lot of cognitive effort. And I'm mentioning this here as a context within which we need to place health communication. Now, this here is my model of the way in which health communication works. And it may look a bit complex at first sight, but actually it's rather simple. If you look at the lower part first, we put some health information, make it available to people, and we would like to have it an impact on people's food choices and people's food consumption. What does it require for this to happen? Well, first of all, people must see the information. They must be exposed to it. They must come into contact with it. And that's not enough. They actually must read it or view it. No, that's what we call attention. If they read it or view it, we would like people to understand what it means. Ideally, we would like to understand it correctly. Beyond that, people many times will make inferences. If people have understood a product, for example, has a reduced sugar content, people many times will make the inference, this means that it is a healthier product, even though that may not have been part of the message. To the extent all this happens, it will enrich people's nutrition knowledge. And this body of knowledge is that one, what people can bring to the choices that they make when they buy and consume food. The way all this happens depends on a whole range of factors. We know that demographic factors play a role. for example, that lower social classes are less likely to process health information. We also know that motivation and credibility plays a big role, consumers' motivation and the credibility they assign to the information and the information source. And what I will now do in most of the remaining presentation here, I will go through these steps here in the model and say a few words about each of them. So we start with exposure and attention. We start with the question, is the information noticed at all by consumers? And here we have one major distinction, namely whether the information reaches consumers because they have been looking for it or because it reaches consumers by accident. Because many consumers, of course, do search actively for health information. They may sit in front of the computer and Google something and get some information. They may contact their doctor, they may visit a dietist, things like that. People doing this will normally be people who have a high motivation for healthy eating. But otherwise, even when we do not search actively for health information, we may by accident be exposed to it. By listening to what friends are saying, by seeing things in the internet, reading things in magazines and newspapers and so on. The effect of that information will be less because people are less motivated, but it can still have some effect on people. What are then the factors that determine whether people actually read or view the information once they have been exposed to it? And the major factor here, again, is the motivation. If people are motivated for healthy eating, it gets much more likely that when they are exposed to health information, that they actually will also read it. And that leads us already to one major conclusion here, namely the likelihood for health information to be read by people is highest for those people who are most motivated for healthy eating, and that means it's highest for those people that in all likelihood already have a healthier diet. And turning it the other way around, it means that those people who have an unhealthy diet and who may not be so motivated to eat healthily, they are more difficult to reach by health communication. We can try to do something about it by doing something about the way the message is designed. If the message is louder, bigger, more unusual, more astonishing to the audience, it will increase the likelihood of people noticing it, reading it, even though they may not be motivated. And why can it be that not everybody has a health motive? Why can it be that not everybody has an interest in healthy eating? Because seen in isolation, of course, everybody should be interested in having a healthy life. If you're not healthy, it's difficult to work, it's difficult to have fun in your life. Everybody has some interest in health. The problem in the food context is that food choice is governed by multiple motives. The health motive is only one of them, and many times not the most important one. Enjoyment is a very strong motive for choosing food. There may be other motives like family acceptance and things like that. And for that reason, many times when people make food choices, the health motive is either not strong or what we call not salient. And the figure on the right gives a very, very simple example. People had to choose one of 4 yogurts, and in one case, people were instructed, choose the one that's healthiest. And most people choose the one with the muesli, and not the one with the chocolate. But if you ask people, choose the one which you like most, then the choices are distributed evenly over the 4 alternatives because people differ in the taste preferences between muesli, strawberry, apple, and chocolate. Here, there are a few figures showing where the information comes from. This is based on a study where people should indicate to which extent they use different sources for health information. It's self-reported, so in reality, information search may be a little bit lower. But the most interesting finding here is that the most frequently mentioned source of health information across these 5 different countries here is searching on the web using Google. So Googling for health information is actually the most widely used source. And we all know that the information you get by Googling is all kinds of information of different quality, of different credibility, of different usefulness. But this is the information that people mention most frequently. If we ask people about the credibility of different health information sources, it looks a little bit different. We have some results here on the left. The highest credible source are physicians and health professionals, then health authorities, then friends and family and health experts, and health bloggers. The food industry are way down on the list here. So people do assign higher credibility to those sources that also have some authority and some competence actually in communicating about health. But of course, there is a lot of information out there, especially on the net, where it may not always be completely clear what the source actually is. And on the right-hand side, you see a figure from actually a very interesting piece of research on determinants of perceived credibility of information sources that people find on the net. And of course, it does play a role whether people think the arguments are of good quality. And it seems that the arguments are based on credible references, but we can see that it also plays a role whether people are well formulated. And if it's not from a scientific source, but people are just sharing experiences, it plays a role whether a lot of other people share similar experiences, which means that we also have health information having an impact that from a scientific point of view may actually not be the most valid. So if you look at this first step here of the communication process, is health information noticed at all? People search for health information only when they are motivated, even though they may also come across health information accidentally. They use multiple sources, and the credibility of health information does not only depend on the quality of the arguments. And it's clear that people who probably already eat more healthily are easier to reach by health communication than those people who don't. The second question, or the second 2 boxes in the model here, then understanding and inferences. Do people understand what is being said? And also here, again, motivation plays a big role, because motivation will determine whether people are willing to make an effort to understand what it means. This effort, it's a cognitive effort. It means you need to use time and mental resources. You will only do that when you are motivated. Otherwise, we will have what we call a shallow extent of processing. And the other major factor in understanding here is the amount of knowledge that people already have that can help them in understanding the message. So those people who already have a fair amount of nutrition knowledge, they will also find it easier to understand new information, which again leads us to that those people already more knowledgeable and more motivated will find it easier to process health information. Time plays a role. If people are in a hurry, if people find the information in a situation which doesn't make it possible to use time to process it, of course there is a danger that the information may be misunderstood or somehow may lead to misleading consequences. Of course, the way the message is formulated and the context in which it is presented also plays a role. Here we have some data. It's from a Danish study, the country where I'm based, about people's understanding of dietary guidelines. We took 5 of the major official dietary guidelines we have here about fat, eating fish, vegetables, red meat, and full grain, and gave people a very simple multiple choice context. One of the answers was the official guideline, and then there was one which was wrong and one which was sort of in between. And we can see here that between half and 2/3 of the people got the right answer. And in general, we have quite a number of studies looking at people's understanding of dietary guidelines, and they show by and large that some of the major messages most people have learned. Most people have learned you should be careful about animal fat, about sugar. Most people have learned it's good to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. They may not know the details, like in this case here, how many times the official guidelines say you should eat fish during a week. But some of the basics seem to be relatively well understood. It's different with more technical information. For example, health claims that we find on product, that's a form of health communication like this one here. This is one of those that within the EU are officially approved to be used on products. Consumption of beta-glucans from oat or barley as part of meal contributes to the reduction of the blood glucose rise after that meal. That's pretty technical, so we may fear that a lot of consumers may misunderstand this type of information. We've been looking at to which extent that is the case. We asked people just to write down what they think it means, and then we classified the answers whether they were sort of a safe interpretation in line with the scientific evidence, or it was a risky interpretation, clearly misunderstood or beyond the scientific evidence, or something else. And as you can see in the graph here, about 58%, that means more than half of the respondents actually got it sort of pretty right, even though it was technical and looks like it's a bit difficult to understand. Of course, in health communication, we can try to make it easier for people to understand this. For example, we can add to this rather technical health claim, we can add a more general formulation like this product is good for your blood glucose. That's actually, in the EU, it's legal to do that as long as you also have the specific information. When we do that, and again then ask people, what do you think this means? And then we classify the information according to safe, risky, and other. The share of people coming up with a correct, safe interpretation falls dramatically. And it has something to do with that people concentrate on this general claim, don't really read the more specific claim, and therefore are led into a direction which actually may be not the right one. We can do other things. We can give people additional information explaining what blood glucose or beta-glucan or fibers means. We can try to find another formulation which seems less technical. Whatever we do, in this case here, actually we don't improve the understanding. On the contrary, we may actually decrease the share of people that understand this form of health communication here correctly. So what these two examples show here is that understanding is an active process. People construct the meaning of a message by relating it to the previous knowledge that they have on the subject, and that means that different people will also attach different meanings to different forms of health communication. Many people have understood some basics of nutrition, like the role of fat and sugar and the importance of eating in fruits and vegetables. But many people likewise find it more difficult to understand the details, understand technical language, and contradicting statements that we often find when we just search for information, like on the internet, lead to confusion and potentially unwarranted conclusions. And we may try to do something about that, give more information, explain things better. But as the example I showed you a second ago shows that actually is not always beneficial with regard to the understanding of the information. Then, if people have noticed the information, have read it, have understood it more or less correctly, it can enrich people's nutritional knowledge, which is what they then bring to their decision making when they choose food and make decisions about what to eat. So what is nutritional knowledge? That actually is a rather complex thing. This one here, what I have here on the slide here is based on the work of a group of researchers in the UK, Parmenter and Wardle, who say nutritional knowledge has 5 dimensions. First of all, awareness of dietary recommendations, as we have just seen before, knowledge of the nutrient content of different foods, whether you understand basic terms in nutrition, whether you are aware of the way what you eat affects your health, and last and not least, your ability to apply this information in the choices you make. And if nutritional knowledge is such a relatively complex thing, it's also a complex thing to measure, but it can be done. Sometimes all 5 dimensions, sometimes only part of it. And that also means we can look at whether people knowing more about nutrition actually do make better choices. We come to that in a second. But the short answer already now is, well, yes, there is a relationship, but not a very strong one. And the nutritional knowledge also is related to sociodemographic characteristics, and it actually also differs between countries. We see some examples of that here. On the left, we have some aspects of nutritional knowledge of energy, knowledge about fat content of different products, recommendations about which foods to eat how much of, and we have how it differs by social class. A is highest, D is lowest. And what you clearly can see is there is a relationship that those people in the lowest social class, they have least knowledge, and those people in the highest social class, they know most. And these are probably also the people eating more healthily. On the graph on the right-hand side, you see some country differences. We also have differences between countries. And the graph here on the right, we, for example, see that at least on 2 out of 3, these 3 dimensions, people in the UK had more knowledge. And that probably reflects the fact that in the UK, giving nutrition information to the general public has a long tradition. They started years before that became more mainstream in other parts of Europe. But there are also differences in the history in different countries about what has been emphasized. For example, we can see here that the information about fat there's pretty good knowledge about fat in Germany, for example, but that has been a focus in health communication for many years, whereas that's not the case in, for example, Hungary. But in Hungary, there has been a focus on sugar for many years, which is not part of the graph, but where we would find that they have some better knowledge. So nutritional knowledge encompasses many things: dietary recommendations, nutrient content in food, nutritional terms, the relationships between what you eat and your health, and the ability to apply this knowledge in food choices. It's something that accumulates slowly over time and is fed by many sources. And it's a societal process. It's driven by multiple actors. No single campaign will have a dramatic effect on something. But if we have nutritional knowledge across different channels, across different sources over time, it will have an effect that we also can measure. So what then about behavior? Because from a behavioral change perspective, of course, what we want in the end is we give people information about nutrition. We want that it has an impact on people's choices with regard to what to buy and what to eat. And the good news is there is a relationship, that people who know more also make better choices. We see an example here on the right, again from a UK investigation. People were classified according to their level of nutrition knowledge, and then as a dependent variable, here we have the portions of intake of fruits and vegetables per day, and you can see there is clearly a relationship. There are many studies, many of them find a positive relationship. It's mostly not very strong, but there is one. There are also studies that find no relationship, and there are even studies that find a negative relationship. So we may find, why can it be that even though people know what they should eat in terms of health and nutrition, that they don't use that knowledge when they make choices? And it comes back to what I said early on, namely it has to do with that the health motive is not the only motive when we make choices for food. There are other motives, enjoyment, family, convenience that play a role, and either there may be a trade-off, and the health motive may lose out, for example, against the good taste, or sometimes also the health motive may simply be forgotten, especially when the choices we make are choices that are habitual, that we have made many times and without thinking a lot about it. Of course, sometimes it's also related to that at the point of purchase, when we buy food, we don't get the necessary information to distinguish the more from the less healthy. If there's no labeling or if it's difficult to understand, that can also play a role. But the competition of different motives is probably the most important aspect, and it's underlined by this one here. This is from a very recent Eurobarometer study carried out in a lot of different countries with a very large sample. From a longer list, people should tick off the three things that are most important to them when they buy food, and what comes out is this one here. The top three are good taste, food safety, and low cost. And health comes lower down the line. Health, of course, also plays a role, but it's not the top consideration when we make food choices. And that brings me back to this graph here about health communication, because it underlines when we want to make, when we want to engage in health communication in order to have an impact on people's choices, we need to remember that health communication cannot stand alone. It needs to be embedded in a range of measures that together then can have an effect on people's choices. Of course, regulation and taxation are the most sort of severe instruments. But in addition to that, we can do a lot also by making healthy choices more available, by having other small changes in the environment in which people make choices, all these things that are called nudging, that will support the effect of health communication and the effect it has on people's choices. So, summing up, my presentation here today, health communication, we can look at it from the perspective of right to know or from the perspective of behavioral change. And it has an effect on behavioral change only when it's noticed, understood, becomes part of nutrition knowledge, and when this knowledge is actually used to make decision. And the effect is most likely to happen in those cases where people already eat more healthily, and that's one of the major challenges that we have. But it is important that we remember that health communication aimed at behavioral change should be viewed in the context of other measures at furthering healthy and sustainable food choices. Thank you for your attention. That's what I had for you here today.
Professor Klaus Grunert, thank you very much for your inspirational speech. Our next speaker is Mr. Roy Bellum. He is the Managing Director and the Head of Education at British Nutrition Foundation. His speech will focus on British Nutrition Foundation project, which has been coordinating all through the UK since the last 10 years and reaching out millions of children in elementary schools to promote a balanced nutrition. Now we're listening, Mr. Roy Bellum. Now we're listening to Mr. Roy Bellum. Roy Bellum, the stage is yours. Please welcome.
Well, thank you ever so much. And I must thank our gracious guests this afternoon for inviting me to attend this wonderful conference. And I hope it's been going well for you. My name's Roy, and I work for the British Nutrition Foundation. So good afternoon to everybody from a lockdown London here. And I'm sure we're all competing with very similar issues at the moment. But I've been invited today to speak around food and nutrition science communications in schools. So this is going to be very much a perspective from the UK, but I'm sure you'll be able to share this within the context of your own countries around the world. So I'm going to be looking at really the context of setting this up about schools, about the importance of taking teachers on that journey with that communication of the science, particularly around nutrition for us. Then it's about the resources that are developed for the teachers to teach and for the pupils to learn. And then lastly, it's about the key part is about the delivery of this to actually have that impact. Because as we all know, you can have information, you can have people giving information, but it really ultimately needs to make an impact at the end of the day. So the BNF, just so that you're aware, is a public-facing charity. And we really exist to give people, educators and organisations reliable information on nutrition, evidence-based information. And you can find more at nutrition.org.uk. And we get involved in lots of different things throughout the year. So we've been responding to COVID-19. We've been supporting schools, as well as communicating the evidence based on nutrition through the media, for example, as well as providing information on our website and training, and just really championing nutrition as we go through. So let's get back to schools. So as I said, I'm going to use the UK as a context and really looking at the curriculum, that what has to be taught, because that's the important thing. So we can think that lots of things are important, but teachers are usually have to go by what the government says with the curriculum on the main. And then we're going to focus on England because that's the biggest country within the United Kingdom. And really here, we've got science communication running through a number of different curriculum subjects. So we have science, as you would imagine, so the body, nutrients, digestion, and so forth. PE, so physical education, so really bringing the two together, the energy balance dimension. We've got relationships and health education coming through, so really the applied aspect. And then we have other subjects, so cross-curricular, which might be English literacy, maths, for example. And then we have a subject called design and technology, cooking and nutrition. And here's where pupils learn about food origins and its provenance, the cooking aspect, and then putting that all together, actually applying healthy eating and nutrition, which is what ultimately we want pupils to be able to do when they're at school and in their future lives with their friends and their families as they go through. So a bit of context for you. So for us, just over about half of our primary schools, which teach children aged between 5 to 11 years old, teach around 10 hours of food per year. And it's about 14% for secondary. We don't have any legal hours that teachers have to teach food and nutrition for at all. The key issues that have been identified through research, and you'll be able to find this presentation with the references at the bottom, is there's a lack of timetabling, there's a lack of budget and facilities and resources. So these are just not helping. And also we have an issue with staff training, and that's quite challenging for people to try and access. And we also know there are issues when teachers are being trained. So a primary school teacher that would be expected to teach lots of different types of subjects, they would perhaps only get 3 hours of D&T study, but food would only be one part of that. And we also know that we've got a very low level of people coming into the profession. So a few years ago, there were just 35 food people coming into secondary school education to teach. So we've got a few challenges up our sleeves, that's for sure. So what's the key issues then about this communication? So really, it's about that accuracy and communication for all. And that means for our teachers and for our learners, because we want to avoid that sort of conflict, that potential confusion. So there needs to be consistency running through. So therefore, we need to make sure that the teacher's knowledge and skills are up to date, and also their own beliefs are in line with what they teach too. We also need to make sure that there's the resource development in place to ensure that when we're selecting and choosing resources or creating resources, that they're also based on evidence-based science too. But at the moment, there are lots of different resources available across the internet where people can download and just use. Again, that might be different in different countries. So in the UK, teachers are free to use any resources they think are appropriate in the classroom. And then there's that delivery to learners. So really, is it relevant? Is it engaging? And is it actionable for that learner at the end? That's really, really quite important. So when we look at accuracy and consistency, what sorts of things are we looking at? So what is accurate and evidence-based? That's a really challenging question. And BNF's currently doing some work with the Academy of Nutrition Sciences in the UK to actually publish a new paper around what is the evidence base. There's a huge wealth of information through the internet, through social media, through TV and so forth. And some research that we've done with young people indicates that nearly 60% of 11 to 14-year-olds really rely on schools as their biggest source of information for healthy eating and nutrition. So that's quite a high, significant figure. So therefore, we need to make sure that teachers and resources have that reliable information to pass on. When we get to slightly older pupils, actually they switch and they go to the internet. So the schools are no longer their source. It's actually they look to the internet for health information as they go forward. And we have some amusing things that we find out, which are amusing, but actually it makes you think a little bit. You know, some children in the UK thought in our survey that pasta was from an animal and that tomatoes grew under the ground. I mean, this isn't everywhere, but it does show that there's really some misinformation, some misconnections about our food and about the science of food too. We know that teenagers using more media, especially social media for the health information, they really need to work through that information. But then also when we come to adults, a recent survey we did in the UK with YouGov, when we asked them, where do you go to find information about healthy eating, nutrition, that sort of evidence, 11% just said their family, another 11% said their doctor, a website, and 1% said celebrities. So I think we've got some challenge on our table definitely here. So the second point then is about that teacher knowledge and skills. So when we're looking at that evidence base, so what do teachers need to know? Well, we know they need to teach the curriculum and any qualifications. We also need to make sure that the initial teacher training content is appropriate, up to date, and actually is sufficient in time-wise and in depth. We need to make sure that when teachers are trained, they have professional development and it's available and there are different types to support, particularly at the moment within COVID, where there is no face-to-face meetings. So we need to be looking at different virtual aspects, a bit like today, for example. And also some teachers, yes, they're qualified, but they're not subject experts. So we need to make sure that if they're teaching a subject and delivering that science communication message, that they are up to speed. That's an important issue. So while they're trained as teachers and have the pedagogy, we need to make sure they also have the subject expertise to deliver that too. So ways forward. So we need to make sure that teachers have the knowledge and skills, that we define and show what good practice looks like, and we have professional development set out. I'm going to give you those examples based around the UK, which may be useful for you in your own context. So a few years ago, we worked with the government to write food knowledge and skills for teachers. These were in primary schools and in secondary schools, and it really set out what the standards, expectations, and requirements should be. It also highlighted for people areas development, but with those clear expectations that were needed. And really, they were aspirational and to be developed over time. And we were delighted that they were published with Public Health England, the agency in the United Kingdom. What we've also gone on to do is to say, well, you've got that knowledge and skills, but what does good practice look like? So over the last few years, we've been developing guidance for teachers around what that good practice looks like in primary and secondary schools. And we're currently working on some guidance for schools that look after children with special needs. And these are important because they really set out what that good practice looks like when it's defined to food and nutrition as in science communication. And it's how that's defined and also exemplified in the classroom. And we think that's quite an important, it's a big jigsaw puzzle coming together. These then also highlight how the characteristics could be covered, but also via some useful case studies around the United Kingdom too. And we're developing these as we go forward into helping people deliver those up-to-date lessons and putting these online too. The third part I mentioned was about teacher training and that being important. And again, we need to make sure that training is provided that's robust and it can be accessed, and it really ultimately makes a difference. So people attend and they can do something as a consequence of that. So we know for some of the training that we've been doing, about 8 in 10 teachers, once they've been to our training, actually go on to make changes to their lessons, to resources, to the way in which they teach. So it is having an impact. We know that people like the workshop, so 96% they're saying that's excellent. And we also know about 2/3, over 2/3, also then cascade that information, talk to their colleagues and give that information to others. So we can see that actually having a cascade effect in schools and between schools too. So in the last sort of year or so, we've trained 350 teachers via webinars, over 3,000 via recording of webinars. We've had face-to-face conferences when we've been able to with teachers, and we've had nearly 3,000 teachers take part in online training. So there's a variety of different training styles and methods to suit different teachers. And even in COVID, we're looking at trying to be flexible and resilient to support teachers. And again, this is important for make sure that communication of the science, practical work, food provenance gets through. So we've been running practical workshops, we've got virtual conferences happening at the same time too. And I mentioned resource development. So this is a critical thing where you've got people having information, whether they're worksheets, presentations, videos in schools, communicating science. How do we know that they're appropriate and up to date? This is really key. And are they consistent? Are they following, for example, government healthy eating messages, for example? So we were quite concerned about this. So we put together a working group and we've actually developed a set of guidelines for producers of resources and for schools to actually have these to develop their own resources, to know that they're following a set of useful guidelines to ensure that accuracy. And really their aim is to set and promote those high standards, to promote that consistency of information, to ensure resources support the curriculum, and also they look at best practice as we go through. And we had a working group looking at these, and we had a public consultation, and we have guidelines covering content. So what is healthy eating? Looking at aspects to do in the UK, for example, about healthy eating, about food provenance, about preparation, choice and lifestyles that would include physical activity. So when other people are looking at this, they can then look at what things that they need to know are evidence-based and use the same source of information. This will help that consistency of information getting into schools. These are then complemented by other guidelines which focus on, for example, making sure something is evidence-based, making sure it's not just a campaign. Are they original works? Is the design appropriate for the age and the ability of the pupil? Have we taken into account the society, cultural and religious factors? And also simple things like, have you put the contact details in, which sometimes people do not do. So we believe these are really quite useful because they can be used generally to promote that consistent information to schools. They can help publishers and agencies really develop those high quality resources as we go through. And also they help teachers to audit current or new resources to ensure that they're accurate and up to date. And again, this is all part of our ambition to ensure that overall we've got good science communication in schools. As I say, it's about making sure we've got the curriculum in place, we've got the teachers up to speed to teach it, and we've got good quality resources. And then it's that impact on learning too, which is about the delivery ultimately to learners. And we really need to make sure that that content that's been produced and the teachers that have been trained do a few things. So first of all, we need to make sure that it's relevant to that pupil, and really to make sure that relevancy is there from a cultural, diversity and experiential perspective for the pupils. So it's meaningful to them as they go away. We also need to make sure that it's engaging to that pupil too. And there are different strategies that you could use, for example, active learning. And you need to make sure it's very motivational so that they're engaged all the time. And also we need to make sure that it's actionable, because ultimately from the science communication around food and nutrition within a school context, we want them to use it, apply it, and evaluate that content for themselves now and in the future. And that's really quite important as we go through. We do this all through our Food a Fact of Life programme, and we've been delighted over the years to work with the Sebriolka Foundation on their own programme too. I think they've done some wonderful work. And really, we've been looking at, again, developing that progression in mind, and we write it with experts like they have done. It supports the curriculum qualification. We pilot the work and check it with our committees. It's free, and we do professional development as we go through. And in the last year, we've actually had over 1 million resources downloaded through schools, but following that very important format of making sure things are evidence-based, they give case studies, they're accurate, and they're really cascading good information that's consistent for all schools throughout the UK. And this is important for our science communication into schools. So really a few take-home points for you this afternoon. First of all, it's about always putting the science first, and it's really providing that credibility as we go through. So all the work we do is always around, what does the science say? That's really, really important to all our work. Then it's also about considering about what can be supported from your perspective. Different agencies and people have different views and so forth, but every little helps, but we all need to pull in the same direction. We all need to say, well, we're all going to sign up to this because we understand that schools are important, and therefore we're all going to push and pull in the same way to make sure that those pupils in school get a good learning experience based on the good science available. But it is a jigsaw puzzle. So it's a multifactorial approach is needed. So therefore we know that schools, we need to make sure that we've got good initial teacher training so that the teachers there get the training and experience needed, that we have professional development in place for those people currently teaching. So we've got lifelong learning happening in their career, that resources are developed and they're reviewed consistently and they're up to date based on, for example, the guidelines I showed you, and that their delivery is effective and meaningful as we go on. And what I really hope at the end of this, if all this can come together, that we'll have much more effective science and food and nutrition communication in schools, ultimately to support young people to live healthier, happier lives. And thank you very much for my presentation.
Thank you very much for your valuable presentation, Mr. Roybal.
Thank you.
Now I would like to welcome Professor Vishwanath, Director of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, India Research Center. Professor Vishwanath has an extensive track record of research in the US and globally on the role of health communication in health and well-being, with a particular interest in the issues of inequalities and poverty. Welcome, Professor. Welcome, Professor, once again. We're really waiting to hear about your valuable speech and valuable comments. Please welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I can go ahead and start? So,
yes, please.
Thank you. So let me first start by thanking Elka Foundation for having me today here and giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts about real challenges we have in communicating science in the 21st century. I will shortly explain what I mean by that. At the same time, I will also identify some opportunities as a result of these developments. There are two key features, or what I call as revolutions, that inform a lot of our discussions. Certainly, a lot of you are familiar with life sciences revolution, the tremendous developments in the advancement of life sciences that have really changed the way we live and how long we live and how healthy we live. But equally pertinent, I think, is the informatics revolution, the revolution in communication information technologies, which is characterized by generation of a lot of information, both health and scientific, and also dissemination of that information to the public, and the proliferation of the platforms and devices. I want to focus on that revolution and why it is critical for both science information or science-based information, say in the context of nutrition, right? So in the 21st century, given the information ecosystem, I propose that we have 4 communication challenges. And those challenges can be addressed by 4 solutions, which is what I will go through pretty fast today. So challenge number one is there is a tremendous proliferation of platforms of informing people, which also is sometimes characterized by misinformation and disinformation, as you will see. So for example, it is not rocket science. All of us know this. We have multiple platforms that are being used, whether it's a laptop, smartphone, or whatever the device is. And the very fact that I'm able to talk to you in Turkey today, all the way from Boston, suggests also the role of the internet and how we are able to really transcend time and borders to communicate. And of course, social media themselves have compounded the issues, both for good and ill, which I will talk about, right? So what happens? What happens as a result of which, if you think about it, globally, this is increasing. It's the nature of both people who are on different kinds of devices and who are connecting online. This is what we characterize as always online. All of us are networked always online. For us, we are interested in the consequences of these developments, right? So there are 2 major consequences. One is the sheer information deluge, right? So what is happening is so much information is being produced at such great speed. Some people have called it big data. It is data in some kind of some kind. The velocity, the volume with which we are generating the information is causing, I think you see the picture there. It's like virtually drinking from a fire hose, which is impossible. The second feature, which is more important, I think, is the limited or no gatekeeping. That is, we used to be, have some kind of a filters when we see information. If you look at newspapers or television news programs, the editors filter out unnecessary information, decide what is important for us, and then show it to us. But with social media and other kinds of media, there is no gatekeeping, which sort of starts creating problems. The challenge number 2 is the production of science and health information. It's just not in the realm of scientists alone. We used to think that science and scientists and scientific establishments produce science or scientific information, engender knowledge. But that's not necessarily the case anymore. There are a number of players in the process in producing knowledge, or at least they think knowledge. So one of the most important gatekeepers is, of course, journalists. Journalists are trained in this, they work hard at this, they have certain occupational practices, journalistic practices, which allows us to look at information that is relevant for us. However, there are other groups, private sector communications. Again, private sector communications through news, their research, their marketing, advertising also influence perceptions of risk, and they promote scientific norms or social norms, and of course, risk behaviors. And sometimes the role of private sector drowns out accurate scientific information. Sometimes that's not necessarily the case, right? But it's if you take a look, for example, of three of the products that are one of the most risk producing: sugar sweetened beverages, fast food, obesity, and tobacco use. The advertising budget for these products is much more than what you can say in your nutrition communication, for example, right? So that is the challenge we face with private sector. And then, of course, we have the NGOs and the civic sector, right? Activist and interest groups. There are special interest groups which are always advocating positions that are counter to scientific evidence, whether it is vaccines, which we are all seeing now with COVID-19, or with foods such as GMO and other kinds of nutrition foods, where the science does not support these advocacy positions, but unfortunately, they take these positions. Vaccines is a good example. Now, the entire world is suffering from COVID-19. We are about to introduce these vaccines or vaccination programs. However, whether people will accept it or not is going to be a huge challenge. Again, counter to scientific revolutions, right? And then, of course, at one time, information was produced by mainstream media, but with the penetration of social media and apps, individuals have become producers of information and disseminators of information. And because of the network effect, so where people share information so freely, it just, one push of a finger, you can actually spread that information within your network. You're actually seeing misleading information spreading very fast, right? And you can see the sheer number of people. There are about roughly 7.5 billion people in the world, out of which almost 3.8 or 4 billion people are active users of social media. So we have 50% of the population globally producing and consuming information on their own, not necessarily with any filters or gatekeeping, I think. So all of this leads to a challenge, what we are calling a spiral of amplification, where not only information, but disinformation and misinformation is being mainstreamed, is being accepted. Now, it used to be in side stream, it used to be small groups of people producing this misinformation, but now it is being mainstreamed as a result of social media. So it is not just scientists, it is journalists, it's popular culture, it is social media, private sectors, activist groups, individuals. Everybody is in the act producing or interpreting, misinterpreting, reinterpreting scientific and nutrition information. I think that is the challenge we are facing. The challenge number 3 is information does not mean communication, right? Those are two different concepts, right? Just because you have produced a lot of information out there doesn't mean people understand. As I mentioned earlier, we have to distinguish between information, misinformation, and disinformation. Misinformation is wrong information. It is, all of us get it wrong because, we don't have the facts right. It is not, with bad intentions. But disinformation is with bad intentions. There are certain actors globally who are producing, spreading false information deliberately to mislead people. For example, if you take COVID-19 as an example, there is a myth out there that 5G cell towers are spreading COVID-19. So in UK and other places, you actually saw people going and torching 5G cell towers, right? So there are many examples like that. So we have to distinguish between these 3 types as we go forward, right? And unfortunately, some of this is now automated, right? Now you have bots, in a recent study that showed bots are likely responsible for half of the COVID-19 tweets, according to one research program. You can imagine, it's just not COVID-19. It could be nutrition, it could be heart disease, it could be anything, where information and misinformation or disinformation is spreading very fast. In scientific realm itself, there is a lot of confusion because we always have this information where studies are produced. One day people read coffee is good for you. Second day people will read coffee is bad for you. And if you are a regular person on the street, you are wondering, can the scientists make up their mind? Why are they confusing me? Especially in the area of nutrition, this is a huge issue because every day there is a new study which either contradicts or supports the earlier studies. And that creates a lot of issues for the people. And then you have problem with social media, right? So you have, I can spend the entire next 4 hours showing you social media information that is absolutely false, that's spreading very fast, especially on channels like WhatsApp, which spread this information and affects people, I think. So, so what is happening is, from a consumption of health and nutrition information, this sheer flood of health information is overwhelming for people. Especially the culture of science and culture of communication are very different. In communications, like journalism, it is episodic. We contradict and conflict science, that's how science works. But people don't have the necessary literacy levels, scientific and research literacy levels, to manage this flood of information. And that is creating a lot of confusion. For example, when we asked people what causes cancer, 50% of them said everything causes cancer, or 15% said nothing could reduce a person's risk of getting a cancer. But we all know that 50% of the cancers can be prevented if you take the right steps, right? And people don't understand the disease etiology. People think COVID-19 was created in a lab, for example, right? And or in the context of COVID-19, people have been saying, if you eat garlic or other foods, any home remedy, it can help prevent infection with coronavirus, or hand dryers are effective in killing coronavirus, right? So you can see what this kind of a sheer flood of misinformation can do to people. The fourth challenge is health and communication inequalities. Just like money or wealth, communication is also unequally distributed. There are differences in the way information is generated and distributed by organizations. I have mentioned a few, but at the individual level also, people have difficulty in accessing, processing, and using health information. Even though there is a lot of health information out there, and that precludes them from taking advantage of this information revolution, right? What I'm saying is class matters, race and ethnicity matters, or tribe matters, and of course, place matters. One example, I apologize, this is a United States example, but you can see this anywhere in the world. If you look at how many people scored correctly on scientific knowledge scale, all of US adults scored 6.7. But if you are a postgraduate, master's student, doctoral, if you have a doctorate or master's, you scored 9.1 out of 11. But if you have high school or 11, less education, you scored only 5. Same thing whether you are ethnicity, right? So what I'm saying is, this is a class difference in knowledge. And you can see the class difference compounded by race difference. In fact, if you look at this knowledge score, whites with less than college education have scored more than blacks with college education here. What I'm saying is, if you're women, a good example is women, even though with same qualification, make 70 cents per $1 that men make. That is a classic case of intersectionality. This class, race, gender, geography influence how people process information. So we have published a number of papers. There are these differences in inequalities in information seeking, information avoidance, knowledge, wrong beliefs, and even association with mortality. So the communication inequalities is not a trivial phenomenon. There is a documentation that is also associated with mortality, right? And this is associated with other indicators of ill health, lack of neighborhoods, lack of access to services, poor air quality, unsafe living conditions. Particularly if you are poor, there is a mindset of scarcity because you are trying to juggle there are demands. Do I pay my rent? Do I take care of my family? Do I pay for the food? And this kind of a hyper vigilance puts a lot of stress on people if you are poor, and stops you from paying complete attention to issues that require your attention. This kind of a cognitive overload. So the consequences are lower knowledge, non-conducive to unhealthy behaviors, limited or no access to services, inability to act on opportunities even when they are available, as a result of which higher disease incidence, prevalence, and even mortality. So these inequalities are not trivial. So the question is, what can be done? Let me just take 2 minutes and end my talk, of what can be done. I must have depressed you, right? I'm just talking about the negative parts, but there is hope for us. There are things that we can do. Number one, we need multi-sectoral and multi-level approaches, right? We have to move the focus away from just individuals. We just can't tell people eat healthy. That is important, but don't put the responsibility on individuals alone. We have to restructure the environment, make sure that different sectors work together, foundations such as Alkar Foundation, companies, government, hospital, health systems, all of us have to work together and create this multi-level approach in communicating nutrition information to people. We should focus on the underserved. We need a laser focus on the underserved because that's where a lot of the problems lie because of the environmental conditions. We should definitely make sure that they are getting the information and they have the environment or climate to use that information to their advantage. We have to build capacity and infrastructure among institutions. Journalists are important allies. They are not our enemies. It is very critical to train journalists, to train NGOs, non-governmental organizations, such as the foundations, community-based organizations, so that they can have the capacity to communicate scientific information to their beneficiaries, to their audiences. We should make sure, we should democratize expertise. We should make sure that expertise is widely available, easily available to people and groups. And the last one is participatory science communication. We have to engage and involve communities. Citizens are very smart people. People are very smart. We just have to provide the right opportunity and engage them, making sure they get the evidence base they need, but also understand the conditions under which they live their lives and use those conditions, to improve our own research and communications on part of it. I'll just end with 2 examples. We are providing nutrition information for women, especially pregnant women and mothers, new mothers in India. And when we were doing that through journalists, training journalists, suddenly COVID-19 broke out. Immediately, we changed our strategy, and now we have created a COVID-19 dashboard. The dashboard is supposed to be plain language translation of scientific information because people are flooded with scientific information on COVID-19, especially the science is evolving every day. What we did is to really translate the science, whether it is myths and facts or frequently asked questions, tips for tobacco control, social media tips, health and well-being, data spotlight, so that people can go to one place. They don't have to read a lot of things and get confused. They can come here, we keep updating these things, and they can read it in a very simple language, right? And journalists are using it, people are using it. In fact, there was so much demand for this dashboard, we had to translate them into Hindi, Spanish, and Portuguese, in addition to English, to ensure this kind of a translation of scientific information for public consumption. In another case, we engaged citizens to generate data for us. For example, it's very difficult to know how people are exposed to risk information. So we through their cell phones, we asked people, if you see tobacco-related risk information, tell us about it. And through their mobile phones, they were able to generate the data for us and send it to us, right? That's what we mean by citizen science, engaging people in it. So I think there is tremendous possibility with these new technologies to overcome these barriers. The question is, how will we use them? I think what we need, both in scientific enterprise as well as in communication, a new approach that requires laser focus on the underserved, where we engage the communities and where science communication is participatory. If we do that, I'm fairly confident that we'll be very successful in communicating science with the publics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vishwanath. Thank you so much for your inspiring speech.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Fiona Lethbridge from Science Media Centre. She has been working in the Science Media Centre in UK as a senior press officer since 2015. She has a PhD in evolutionary biology from the University of Edinburgh, where she was also involved in the Biopolitics podcast and student radio station Fresh Air. Welcome, Fiona. Welcome, Fiona Lethbridge, once again. Please keep on with your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone, and good to speak to you. Hopefully you can see my slides. So I'm just going to spend 20 minutes telling you about the Science Media Centre in the UK, who we are, what we do, what our aims are, etc. So we are an independent press office. We were set up in 2002 after there had been some very big high-profile media stories in the UK that went a bit wrong. So that was things like the MMR and autism health scare, Frankenfoods when GM crops were first being talked about, and BSE and CJD. And these were the sorts of headlines we had at that time. So questions about vaccine safety, questions about food safety. And one of the things that was a common factor in those stories is that we didn't hear enough at that time, so 20 years ago now, we didn't hear enough from scientists, experts in the area who knew what the data was, who researched that area and knew what the evidence was. So we were set up to address that. So we are an independent organisation, and we were set up to provide a link between the scientific community and the UK national news media to make sure that these two groups of people are in touch with each other, to make sure that journalists can access good experts when they're writing about science, and to make sure that scientists can have their say on the big stories of the day. And our whole aim is to try and ensure that media coverage of science is as accurate and evidence-based as possible. So we don't care much about quantity of media coverage. We're not doing PR for science to try and get lots of media coverage. We're just concerned with the quality of that media coverage. So we want media coverage to be accurate and evidence-based. So we often say to scientists that we'll help the media to do science better when scientists do the media better. They can't be expected to get everything right by themselves, and they need help from experts. And why the news media? So we don't do much on social media. We concentrate on the mass news media in the UK. And that's because the latest evidence here still suggests that most people get most of their information about science from the news media. So social media and blogs are all well and good, but we say don't ignore the mass media because that's where you reach most members of the public. And if you as an expert don't say something when a journalist asks for your help, then someone else will. The journalist won't wait to write the story. The story will happen with or without you. So better that good experts are in there helping make sure the story is accurate. I'm not expecting you to read this slide. This is just to remind me to tell you how we're funded. So we're a charity and we're funded by about 100 different organizations. Loosely, this is kind of the scientific community. So lots of universities, research councils, the big funders in the UK, industry, government departments, learned societies and learned bodies. And we cap donations at 5% of our annual income. So we are independent from all these organizations. So we have editorial control over all the stories we work on, and these funders can't tell us what to do or what not to do. The way we work is that we have a database of about 3,000 scientists from across the UK in different topics. Mostly they're university academics, but some of them, we have a few industry scientists as well. We also work with press officers at all those institutions and the journalists. And the journalists that we have are science and health correspondents at all these UK national outlets. So the newspapers, whether that's what we call tabloid, popular press, or broadsheet press, or broadcast channels and programmes like BBC News, and then the newswires like Reuters and Press Association, which feeds all of these outlets. And we're lucky in the UK, which I know isn't the case in other countries, that in the UK, every one of those outlets mentioned still has a science correspondent, a health correspondent, an environment correspondent, and it's those specialist journalists that we work with. So I'll just go through a few examples of what we do on a day-to-day basis to try and achieve our charitable objectives, which are to increase the accuracy and evidence base of media reporting of science. And those things are rapid reactions, roundups, and press briefings and journalist inquiries. So firstly, I'll tell you what a rapid reaction is. That's what we do when there's a big breaking story. And of course, it's hard to do a talk in 2020 without talking about COVID. So obviously since January, we've been working almost exclusively on COVID with a few exceptions. And it's been extremely busy, of course, because it's been a huge story. The appetite for experts among journalists is enormous. And we want to make sure that the media coverage of COVID is accurate and evidence-based so that what the public are reading about is informed and accurate. So this is going back now to first thing this year. So these were the sorts of headlines we had in early January. This was when this was still very much a story about China, and we'd heard of this mysterious illness in China. And because we're very media-led, we pay attention to what's in the media. So we had seen this and we thought, this is something for us to keep an eye on. I wonder what's going to happen with this. Let's get in touch with some of our expert scientists that we know to find out how worried they are about this. And as soon as these sorts of headlines start occurring, journalists get in touch with us and ask us for help because we're sort of a known piece of the media landscape in the UK. So the science and health journalists know the Science Media Centre. They know that they can come to us when they want help finding experts who can help them with their stories. So from early on, from kind of mid-January, we started responding to the COVID-19 outbreak. So in the very early days, this was before it had a name. This was when it was just a coronavirus. These are the sorts of people that we went to for comments, and we go to our database and we find the experts with relevant expertise and say to them, this story is in the news, journalists are asking questions about it. Can you please send us a written comment that we can send out to journalists by email and they can use it in their coverage? So people like Jeremy Farrar, who's director of the Wellcome Trust and also an infectious disease expert, he said things like, it suggests that there's already some level of person-to-person transmission. At the end there, he says there's more to come from this epidemic. Obviously, he was right. Another academic there saying that there certainly is potential for someone travelling back from an affected region to bring the virus back to the UK, which, as we know, happened. And we sent out lots of comments from other infectious disease, public health, virology, etc. experts. And the whole point of this is to try not to leave a void. So journalists have questions, the public have questions. Who better to answer those questions than good scientists who know what the evidence is, and also are open with uncertainty. So there was certainly a lot of uncertainty, and there still is. Certainly back then we didn't know a huge amount about the virus, but scientists are still able to say lots of useful things, even if they also say there's so much we don't know yet about this. What we think so far is this, this, and this, but we don't know this, and we'll have to see what happens. And these are just some examples of where the UK media used the comments that we sent out in those early days. So the boxes are the comments that we sent out to journalists. So that's an example in the Mirror, similarly in BBC News. And then throughout COVID, we have done that to every development. So I've got a slide at the end which shows you how many comments we've sent out on COVID. But this was a more recent one back in September when the trial of the Oxford University vaccine was paused due to an adverse event. It was then restarted when it was decided that it was likely unrelated to the vaccine. But of course, that's another big story. Journalists have questions, the public are interested, people are worried and want to know how worried we should be. So we go to relevant scientists on our database and say, can you send us a comment about this that we can send out to journalists? So these are the kinds of things that people said, that the fact that the pause happened showed that the system was working, the safety procedures had kicked in. Another expert saying that it was right for the trial to be paused while the investigation takes place, and that this is actually a normal process of trials, and it's not uncommon for participants to become ill during the trial, given that they involve thousands of people. Other experts, again, explaining how the safety and the data and safety procedures work, why this trial has started, and again, has paused, and again, emphasizing what we still don't know. So a lot of these people were saying, we don't, due to patient confidentiality, we don't know what the details are, and it's right that we don't know because of those reasons. But this is a normal process of trials. And again, here are some examples of where those comments that we sent out were used in the media. So a piece in Reuters that used the comments that we sent out, similarly in the Telegraph and NBC News. So right across the board, really, journalists from all these different outlets use the comments that we send out. So they are useful to the media. And of course, apart from 2020, when we've almost entirely worked on COVID, normally we work on all sorts of different stories, science, health and environment. That's included things like Fukushima, the Novichok incident, which happened in the UK a couple of years ago, flooding, and various other big stories. So secondly, I'll just tell you what a roundup is. This is what we do when there is a new piece of science that's being published. So usually that's a new journal paper. We are on the press list for the main top 10 to 15 science journals, UK and internationally, and we receive press releases from those journals at the same time as journalists do, which is usually a day or two ahead of publication under embargo. And we look through those press releases and identify stories that we think could have the potential to be misrepresented or misreported, or if we think journalists would find comments from third-party experts, so independent experts, really helpful on this. And so we go to the relevant experts on the database and say, this paper is being published tomorrow. We think journalists will write about it. Can you help by reading the paper and giving us a comment that we can send out to journalists under embargo so that that can help them decide, is this really good science and I should put it on the front page? Is this interesting, but there are some caveats and I'll cover it, but I'll mention those caveats? Or is this really bad science and I shouldn't report it at all? And just a couple of hopefully relevant, I thought I'd include some nutrition stories, examples of this. So this is from a few years ago now. It was a paper being published in, I think, the British Journal of Nutrition. It was suggesting that they had identified significant differences between organic and non-organic foods. So this is what the press release looked like, and it claimed that organic foods are up to 60% higher in antioxidants, and that consuming organic products could lead to an increased intake of nutritionally desirable antioxidants and reduced exposure of toxic heavy metals. So we knew that this was contested and this was a controversial finding. So we thought, I wonder if how good the science is, because we don't know, because we're not scientists. But we want scientists to comment on this on the paper and tell journalists how good this study is. So we went to relevant experts on our database, nutrition professors, dietitians, statisticians who could analyse the stats methods in the paper. And these are the sorts of things that they said. So here's someone saying that they've identified that flavonols and things were higher in the organic produce, but actually when you compare the differences compared to how much you get for your money, then you might not get more overall for the same cost. Here's another scientist saying that it's the additional cost of organic vegetables to the consumer and the likely reduced consumption would easily offset any marginal increases. So basically they're saying it's not as simple as you might think from this story, and here's actually what the study says. Here's a scientist saying that the paper was misleading because it suggests that antioxidants are essential nutrients, which they're not. And another scientist here who was commenting on the quality of the studies that were looked at in this review, and saying that some of the studies they looked at were not high quality, so that reduced the reliability of the evidence. And he says there's no good evidence to suggest that slightly greater antioxidant intake has important public health benefits. So these comments all independently, not because they conferred with each other, but independently came up with a view that actually this paper isn't what people might suggest, and there are limitations with the study. And here is how some outlets covered this story. So the Telegraph saying new study to split opinion on organic food, and including the comments that we sent out. Similarly on BBC News. In the Independent, also commenting on the difference of opinion between scientists. And then Press Association has the headline, Organic Diet Superior, but then the comments that we sent out were included in the article, similarly in The Guardian. So that's just one example. A second example is when IARC released its classification on processed meat and red meat as carcinogenic and probably carcinogenic, respectively. This was a big story, and there were all sorts of headlines about red meat being as bad as tobacco. So this is what the IARC released. So said that red meat was probably carcinogenic and processed meat was carcinogenic. So we again asked relevant experts from our database to look at the evidence, look at the IARC report, and give us a comment that we can send out to journalists. And these are the kinds of things that they said. So here's someone saying that it's important to know that IARC classification reflects the strength of evidence for an effect, but not the actual size of the effect or the size of the risk. David Spiegelhalter, who's a brilliant statistician in the UK, just putting it into numbers. So saying if all 100 people ate 3 rashers every day for the rest of their lives, then according to this report, we would expect that 18% more would get bowel cancer, which is a rise from 6 cases to 7 cases. So that's 1 extra case of bowel cancer in all those 100 lifetime bacon eaters. So putting things into perspective and helping journalists and the public realise what is the size of this risk according to this data and how does it compare with other things like smoking. Again, other experts pointing out that we don't know the size of the risk. This is just whether there is a risk. Someone else saying that it does not mean, as some of the media stories suggest, that eating bacon is as bad as smoking, and that that's a dangerous oversimplification. And others talking about the quality of the data and the stats. So this was a big story. There were big headlines, including these on some of the front pages. But actually, in the articles, there were also plenty of comments from scientists who were putting this into context, highlighting the caveats, making clear that this evidence didn't suggest meat was as bad as smoking. So that was the BBC, The Sun, The Guardian, and The Times, and ITV News. So again, across the board. So the point then of these roundups is that scientists can help inform coverage and ensure coverage is accurate and evidence-based even before the headlines happen. And that's one thing that scientists who work with the Science Media Centre can do, because we have access to these studies just before they're going to be published. Scientists really can help by reading the study, analysing for journalists how good it is, and we send out whatever scientists say to us. So if scientists say, wow, this is brilliant study, I'm surprised, and it completely stands up and the conclusions are backed by the data, that's great, that's what we send out. If they say, this is really poor science, I don't know how it got through peer review, I don't agree with the conclusions, then that's what we send out. So all with the aim of helping journalists to gauge, is this good science, and am I right to report it prominently, or are there important caveats? And finally, then I'll just talk about press briefings. So these are normally physical press conferences that we have in our offices in London. Of course, for most of this year, those have been done online as this conference is being done. But the point of press briefings or press conferences is that scientists get to present their evidence on their own terms, and journalists get the opportunity to get a story and to interrogate the scientists. There are two main types of press briefing that we do, one that we call news briefings and one that we call background briefing. A news briefing is what we do when there's a new paper that's being published. So again, usually that's a new journal paper. And the press briefing there is to allow the authors of the paper to present their work to journalists and to put it in their own words. Whereas a background briefing is a sort of evidence check on a hot topic. So helping to address any misconceptions on a certain area of science that might have been misrepresented in the media. So just to show you a couple of our COVID-19 briefings, this was the first one we did back in mid-January. Again, this was before it had a name. We were getting lots of calls. Lots of journalists had loads of questions about COVID-19. So we thought, let's get some good scientists in who can sit in front of the journalists, answer their questions, and help inform the coverage from the word go. So we gathered a panel of experts who were kind of leading research in the UK on modelling, on infectious diseases, on global health, etc. And we brought them in to give their thoughts on the stage of the epidemic and answer journalist questions. Lots of journalists came because obviously everyone was writing about this, everyone was wondering about this and had questions. I should point out that this was before social distancing was brought in. So this was January, so this was before we had the 2-metre rule or social distancing rules. But this just shows how much interest there was and how keen journalists were. This is a room full of journalists, how keen they were to hear from good experts and have their questions answered. Because our perspective, certainly in the UK, is that these journalists are trying to report things well. The science journalists, by and large, do their best to report things accurately, but they can only do that with the help of good experts. So these were the kinds of stories that we had after that briefing. But all of these articles were informed by important scientific information, detail, caveats, nuances that the scientists put across at the press briefing. And here are some examples of where what they said at the press briefing were used in the coverage, in the Metro, in the Times, and of course they were in demand for broadcast interviews as well. So this is just some examples of the images that were broadcast, and these are in our offices in London. Over the summer, we've done briefings throughout from January until today. This was just another example of one over the summer, which was from the recovery trial, which is the big trial being run in the UK looking at treatments for people hospitalised with COVID-19. And this was one of their kind of first big results looking at steroids, so dexamethasone. So the scientists had been doing this trial. They had their results in, so we brought them in so that they could sit in front of journalists and explain their results, describe them, and answer journalist questions. As I said, since March, we've been doing our briefings remotely because of obviously COVID-19 and social distancing, but we still get massive turnouts. So our average turnout, I think at the moment, is about 30 or 40 national news journalists who dial in to hear from scientists and to ask their questions. And these are the kinds of headlines that resulted from that briefing. So that was one of the few bits of good news we've had this year. So finding that dexamethasone can help a proportion of people who are seriously unwell with COVID in hospital. So coverage across the board. Again, just emphasising that by kind of being proactive and speaking to journalists about new data, scientists can help inform the coverage from the word go and help ensure that they don't leave any questions unanswered so that journalists have a good grasp of the data when they're writing their articles. Finally, I just thought I'd describe a background briefing. So this is what we do when there's a topic which has maybe been in and out of the media and has perhaps been misrepresented or misreported. So dietary fat was quite big a couple of years ago in the UK. There were lots of stories about actually fat being good for you and not harmful as we thought. So we got in touch with some experts and said, is this right? And if not, can you come and speak to journalists about what we do know from evidence? So that's what we did. We put on a panel of experts who could talk about what we know from evidence about dietary fats and benefits and harms. A good turnout of journalists from across various different outlets. And these were the kinds of stories that represented. So that happened after that briefing. So studies saying fat is not that bad are misleading, scientists say. So that's mostly it from me. Hopefully that's useful to see a few examples of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Just wanted to highlight our work on COVID. So this slide is a couple of weeks old now. So we've now done over 90 press briefings on COVID since January. And we've done about 950 roundups, so roundups and rapid reactions, those written comments that I showed you. And we haven't really been able to count how many media inquiries that we've had. But again, that just emphasises when there's huge media interest in a topic, it is an opportunity to make sure that journalists are hearing from good scientists, to make sure that what the public are reading about in the news is accurate and evidence-based. And I'll leave it there. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your valuable speech and messages, dear Fiona.
Thanks.
And now we will be moving on to our last speaker, Professor Ali Atif Bish. For long years, he has been writing as a journalist for numerous publications, and in 2014, he founded the Kitab Publishers, and he is the editor, chief editor, and he's still delivering courses in PhD programs. Welcome. And now we will have our last speaker of our conference, Professor Ali Atif Bish. He has been writing for numerous publications, newspapers and journals for long years. In 2014, he established the Kitab Publishers, and he still manages the publishing house. He is also delivering PhD courses in marketing management. Good evening, everyone. I think the speeches were wonderful. Yesterday, I couldn't listen to a couple of them, but today I have listened to almost all. So, being the last speaker, I don't know what kind of an experience will that be. So, I will be the last speaker. So, misinformation, disinformation, and communication. So we have been talking about the same issues since 3 p.m. So we have to refer to culture as well. And the turn has turned into a global village, first with television and then the social media. So very much like viruses, we are being affected by that very rapidly, and the dissemination of knowledge is now more speedy. And we acquire certain beliefs. So does that change our way of looking at the world? Culture plays a key role here. As I have said, a previous speaker has mentioned that vaccination and the mad cow disease, well, we are being affected by these bits and pieces of information. In the United Kingdom, there was this publication, and it was published. It contained some misinformation, and then it spread to all over the world, and some other cultures internalized that kind of misinformation, and it might result in unwanted outcomes. As we have seen in the United Kingdom, there are a number of social institutions and NGOs fighting for evidence-based information and scientific knowledge. Well, most probably, our participants from different countries don't know these media characters, but I guess for those who participate from Turkey and who listen to us from Turkey, they might have smiled when they have seen this, because before February, before March, one of these characters is a professor, one is an assistant professor or a professor already. But all of them are working in medicine, and since March, they have been delivering these bits of information. That this was misinformation, and they delivered it to the Turkish media without any evidence on hand. Dear Hakan was talking about the world in his speech, and very rightly he was complaining about this misinformation. And acknowledgement is important, and he awaited from acknowledgement. Professor, being a professor is not enough to position yourself as a legitimate source of knowledge and information. We have to question this, and we have to react to that. We have to be open. But as far as I see, these two media characters are still showing up in television programs, and they don't even apologize. So one of the most important issues is that this misinformation and disinformation, be it in this matter or in another matter, in other areas, we are delivered this misinformation all the time. It contains recommendations, statistics. It might be good-willed, but it's not the accurate information, possible treatments, and conspiracy theories about the pandemic and the virus. So we have been talking about the vaccination, and it is said that it is efficient by 95%. But how is that bit of information being interpreted? Because you may not go to the same conclusion. I'm not a nutritionist. I have due respect for those who are knowledgeable in their respective fields, but we need to be using the same and accurate information. We read researchers. Dear Julian has said in her session that we review and evaluate meta-analyses You don't have to be from the same discipline, but you might read them, but you don't have a word there. So as we evaluate these figures, and if you say, and you talk about a 95% effectiveness, you need to really be sure about what to do and what you're talking about. So this is an example. A journalist wrote about people just putting on some butter on their nose to be protected against the virus. So a journalist shares this in social media. It's important because it's disseminated so rapidly. Persons are not important. It doesn't matter what's in the name. But then if someone shares this, someone with a follower of, let's say, 200 and 300,000 people, sometimes even doctors and GPs share these pieces of news. So these are not related to scientific evidence at all. And I'm not sure to what extent these methods are being implemented in society. So what I will be focusing is that creating an impact is not easy. If you would be influenced by everything you see and everything you read, other than the media, if there is an influence, there's an impact, then we are in trouble because our lives would be chaotic and hectic. And let's accept it. We are going through a rather chaotic environment. The media is not controlled, and institutions and their credibility are being questioned. So people can still look for their instinct and their reason to make an assessment of whether they are hearing what they're hearing is accurate or not. The capacity of perceiving messages does not change, and the methods to persuade people do not change. So the scientists are a little bit concerned, but the same anxiety is not created by the public, which is something we pray for, because otherwise we would have to be confronted with a highly risk-generating society. And in Turkey, frankly speaking, we would not know what to do. So people still have this reason. And these scientific processes need to be preserved. So we are not that passive. If we are talking about media, we still have a strong common sense. But the only problem we have is that in these risky times, we should keep away from increasing the level of anxiety and concern in public. So for that to happen, as we deliver information which is evidence-based, we need to make sure that it is an accurate information. This has not been researched in Turkey, but we have it in the United Kingdom and the United States. And I don't know why, but people in Turkey have not voted. What is the relation between coronavirus and 5G? So that information related to this interesting question has been disseminated in dramatic levels. So people can generate dramatic stories on Facebook and on Twitter and similar social media platforms, which in turn increases their credibility in the eyes of people. The message does not have a hierarchical structure. That means it is read by more people, and that means we are talking about a stronger influence. States deliver explanations, and we have to bear unnecessary costs. So what do they do with these bits of information? So I'm coming to that question with the impact of the media and the communication. Well, we need to have a difference between the media and communication. The media is there for dissemination, information, and it might cause some emotions in you. But once that turns into a behavior, into a mode of behavior, those psychosomatic disorders we suffer from, anxieties, everything needs to be questioned. Human beings are not passive, and but we need to shoulder our responsibility as well. One is misinformation. As our professors and assistant professors in Turkey, well, we know what they are doing, we know what they are working on. The media has this kind of hunger, you know, and it's a lusty hunger. So that appetite might result in the production of misinformation being presented as accurate and evidence-based information. And once you have your title next to that information, like a professor or assistant professor, people think that you are an expert in your field and you are accurate in what you are saying. That means your books sell and people listen to you, and you create a fame. And it's very difficult to stand against fame. On the one hand, the media keeps working. You collect your clicks and you collect your money. And at the end of the day, we have to remember our responsibility for humanity. Because at the end of the day, we see that these people have not shouldered their responsibility, which boils down to ethics. If ethics has been eroded, and if people have lost their sense of justice and ethics, that means you do not shoulder that responsibility. And sometimes we have bad intentions. After the crisis in social media platforms, I mean, disseminating wrong information, disinformation. In the old days, teenagers and children used to do that kind of thing. But now we have trolls on social media, and they disseminate conspiracy theories just because they like it and they enjoy it. They disseminate misinformation about the pandemic by using social media, and they create a periphery around it in which they use message bombarding, and some of them do it just for the sake of being evil. And we talk about conspiracy theories, and we know that there is this conspiracy theory brain. They can believe in this a bit of misinformation, and they start disseminating it so as to create a different impact. Our professor from Harvard has already shown it. And just to disseminate that kind of information, we now have both accounts on social media. So one person can use these both BOT accounts and disseminate that kind of misinformation to the public. But let me tell you that in the very near future, as the generations will change, all people will know about it in a decade. Because once you will know their bots, their BOTs, that will turn into a profession, and they won't believe everything they see on the media. This is not evidence-based, I do apologize, but from time to time, I can also generate some anticipations for the future as well. So whether the virus was generated in 2003 in the United States, well, we have been hearing about such questions, but it has narrowed down now. People, so these come from abroad. Of course, I mean, as more people speak foreign languages, the interaction increases. Well, actually, we have gone through a crisis, actually. Famous people have started advertising drugs. This is another problem. Why would a celebrity show up on social media and advertise drugs? So it's all for strengthening and boosting immunity in people. But we do not have any evidence-based information there. Despite this fact, journalists, celebrities, and internet users still disseminate it. And the main reason for that is that they are being consumed. These pieces of news are being read. And we know the economics lying behind this because they get money out of it, you know. And the new coronavirus, well, you may not show symptoms. You might be asymptomatic, but how would you understand whether you are infected or not? And people talk about fever and fibrosis. This is a text produced by the seller of this drug. so your throat should always be moist, and you should consume foods accordingly. So once this text was shared in stories, and of course it's not possible to prove that, but it was for money. At least we presume that it was so. And once that happened, we had a crisis. So as people, as well-known people or celebrities, they should have asked and make sure that they would not disseminating misinformation. Professor Canan Karatay, a very famous nutritionist in Turkey, so people always go to her and ask critical questions. So people should ask this question to themselves, because people, we have news like bone marrow is good for immunity, and this is very interesting. Another issue which is important in Turkey is that this is from the Taiwan market, and in March and April, people have started to quit using Chinese products, even because that was nurtured by a wrong piece of news. It has turned into a mode of behavior, and they're structuring and building daily discourses around these misinformation, and around that we later have a wave of anxiety, which is being inflated all the time. And in Iran, we had this piece of news, which was like alcohol protected people from the coronavirus, but it entered into our agendas from social media, and then it was seen in other places as well. So everyone should be careful about this issue. In the 1980s, as we were talking about communication, we used to refer to public opinion leaders, and you had your message, and those opinion leaders disseminated that information. Now, being an influencer and a public opinion leader have now merged with one another, or they are being confused with one another, more properly speaking. So that results in the dissemination of misinformation. So the critical issue is that the media should confirm the accuracy of these bits of news and then publish them and disseminate to society. We have to be able to measure this influence. So this is from this week. It's an individual preparation, because when I see some messages in the media, I say that, well, it forms the agenda of Turkey. The Turkish agenda is formed. There were people who fell down and died, but we don't have them in Turkey. But those who are hospitalized lose their lives, which means the reason is the hospitals. So this was the very piece of news we have seen. And it's like people at hospitals, the MDs and GPs kill people by using certain drugs, and it's almost a deliberate killing of people. So this is a great irresponsibility. It's very evident that it's a personal fight there, but we need to explain this to people. And when you mention that, it says, this is my personal account, you cannot do anything, it's freedom of speech. But if that account is shared by and followed by hundreds of people, it is no longer a personal account, it's a public account. So there we have the emergence of another responsibility. And similarly, as you can see here, 10 years ago, millions of endemic chicken species were endangered by way of the bird flu and the swine flu. So this is the case in Turkey as well, actually. And in Turkey, in the UK, they have said that they have had their confirmation and they were disseminating this to the media. But in our media, we do not have any position which is called like a scientist journalist. At Sabri Ülker Foundation, well, you have very good conferences on science communication and nutrition, but if you want to deal with this problem, we really need to filter misinformation and right information. Certain groups and certain institutions should be having the word there. We don't expect journalists to be scientists, and we don't want scientists to be journalists, but we need to have a cross-section, emerging area, and that necessitates a minimum amount of research. And we need to be able to differentiate between whether the piece of information that has reached us is coming from a meta-analysis or a research or a survey. If we cannot do even that, then what needs to be done is that we have to teach our students the ability to differentiate between accurate information and misinformation, starting from primary schools, so that they will be able to differentiate between the two in their later years, so that not everything we hear and read and listen to would be turning into concrete modes of behavior. So we don't know where we are heading towards. We keep talking about these issues here, but the media is going through a kind of transformation. As you all very well know, the issue of trust in the media, well, as communicators, we work on that diligently. But as things will be clarified, what we need to do is that as a normal and ordinary person, they should be able to differentiate between misinformation and evidence-based information. And that could be possible through participation in such meetings and seminars and webinars. I think I have used all my time, but this is the end of my presentation. I think we have a number of questions, but Selan, yes. Well, thank you very much. We don't have a Q&A session, but under the live broadcast windows, you have your chat box. So we are collecting and pooling the questions and comments for organizing better conferences later on. So we will be sharing those questions and comments with you. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So this ends our Nutrition and Health Communication Conference on our second day. We would like to extend our thanks to all our eminent speakers and to everyone who has participated in our conference. Your questions and comments about the conference could be shared on the survey section below. And again, you can forward them to our speakers from that box. I wish everyone a very good evening. Keep healthy and safe.